D-181 was used to being picked as a test subject for the various dangerous and downright terrifying experiments and lab work the SCP Foundation had him perform at Secure Facility Site-32. He'd been working for the organization for nearly 5 years, and he considered every day he was alive a blessing, and you would too if you were a D-Class personnel. While no one's too sure on the exact methods the SCP Foundation uses to recruit its D-Class personnel, there are a few prevalent rumors, most of which you've surely heard before. Death row prisoners taken into custody by the Foundation to be unwilling lab rats, ordinary people that society wouldn't miss that were kidnapped off the streets, or sometimes just volunteers. Though we're not sure who in their right mind would willingly volunteer for one of the most degrading, dangerous positions in the entire Foundation. The truth about D-Class is that every site does it differently, and the Foundation is well aware of the controversy among its personnel that comes with recruiting and using D-Class personnel. Heck, some sites don't even have D-Class, citing their use as inhumane. But at Site-32, things were ordinary, and D-181 was one of the many D-Class personnel drafted into the Foundation via the United States prison system. Day in and day out, D-181 would have to perform tests and experiments, most of which he knew next to nothing about. Thankfully for him, D-181 had 2 benefits that made his stay at Site-32 a little easier. First, there was the fact that Site-32 was a low-priority facility. It was located far away from any major population centers, and overall lacked the expensive funding some of the larger sites had. The anomalies contained there were still pretty dangerous, but due to the lack of available funding, most of what the Foundation was able to afford at Site-32 was regulated to safe and Euclid-class objects. Now, as we all know, object class has nothing to do with danger levels, and instead is based on the difficulty the Foundation has containing a certain object more than anything else. So when a site such as Site-32 is underfunded, due to being less of a priority to the larger organization, they're typically only going to be containing the bare minimum in terms of expenses. That means less expensive containment and less elaborate objects for D-181 to work with. It wasn't a guarantee of safety, as nothing ever is in the SCP Foundation, but it was at least beneficial to have an understanding of what's going on in the various experiments D-181 had to perform throughout the day. The second thing D-181 appreciated about Site-32 was a little less conventional. The entire facility was staffed by women, with the exception of male personnel being used for testing purposes. The reason for this is due to a very specific detail about today's anomaly, which we'll get back to, but it was something that D-181 never took for granted. Of course, D-181 was an absolute buffoon when it came to dating, and relations between testing subjects and researchers were discouraged, and in some cases forbidden. However, he never gave up hopes that he might be able to now find a girlfriend, while living in a building that was less than 1% male in population. It is important that we state that D-181 was always respectful to women, and never stepped out of line, which, as far as D-classes go, makes him top-tier boyfriend material. Maybe there's hope for him someday, so long as he survives the deadly daily grind of being on the lowest rung of the Foundation. While these 2 things kept D-181 as happy as someone could be while essentially being enslaved to the Foundation, there was a lot to be unhappy about in his position. First, there was the general danger that came with testing with anomalies every day, where anything and everything could go wrong, and your safety was never guaranteed. Then there were the dreams. Most of the time, D-181's waking state felt like a dream, so that meant the images his brain showed him at night were extra weird. The horrors and oddities that D-181 witnessed during the day always came back to haunt him at night, whether it was a stack of talking bowling balls attacking him in the grocery store, or a teacup that made his skin invert itself every time he drank it. The SCP objects D-181 worked with always cropped up in his dreams at night, and they always seemed to be worse. D-181 asked the other D-Class personnel stationed at the site if they had strange dreams too, and most of them agreed that they experienced them as well. Apparently working for the Foundation fired up the imagination in an extra special way that seeped into nighttime, when D-181 would ideally be receiving some well-deserved sleep from the strangeness of the day. But one dream was bothering D-181 significantly more than usual. It was a recurring one, happening again and again every few nights. The same series of events, playing out over and over again. The strangest part about it was that it didn't feel like a dream at all. D-181 would be laying in his bunk inside Site-32's D-Class barracks, desperately trying to fall asleep. Eventually, he would, but he wouldn't realize it. D-181 would feel like he was asleep, but he could still see the barracks around him, except he couldn't move at all. D-181 was experiencing a form of sleep paralysis, a phenomenon during falling asleep or waking up, where a person is unable to move or speak. Hallucinations during sleep paralysis are common, but the whole experience typically only lasts a few minutes. For D-181, it lasted a lot longer, and he was aware the entire time. So D-181 would be laying down in his bunk, trying to fall asleep, when he would suddenly become unable to move. Then, from across the room, he'd see the door to the barracks open. D-181 knew that the barracks were only accessible to the upper-ranking personnel, and they never came around. First, D-181 saw a large cylinder move itself slightly into the room. Then the figure it was attached to waddled its way through the door. A giant fabric doll, so big that it could barely fit itself into the door. If D-181 could scream, he would. He recognized the figure as an instance of SCP-2386, one of the anomalies he was working on. The doll walked slow and heavy, trying to not collapse over its own weight. It was made of pink fabric, with its face stitched together with thread forming a sly smile and 2 buttons for eyes. It was terrifying. What was even worse were the 2 pairs of wings on the doll's back, like the kinds you'd see on a butterfly or a moth. The brilliant patterns looked like they were made of cloth, sewn to a pair of ordinary insect wings, and completing the doll's patchwork appearance. The insect-doll combination stumbled towards D-181, moving across the barracks slowly and nearly falling over several times. The creeping terror of the doll's slow advance only made D-181 try to move more, but he couldn't. He was completely paralyzed and subject to whatever the doll was about to do to him. Eventually, the doll made it close to D-181's bunk, standing over the bed and staring at D-181 with its lifeless, button-eyed face. It just stood there, staring. D-181 was sweating, with tears in his eyes. He tried to scream again, but nothing came out. And then, to make matters worse, the barracks door opened again, and what made its way through shook D-181 to his very core. It was another doll, even bigger than the other one, and behind it was another doll, and then another. 4 dolls in total made their way into the room and stumbled over to D-181's bed. They continued to stare, crowding around the sleeping D-Class like he was a television set, and their favorite show was about to begin. Just when D-181 thought it couldn't get any worse, the dolls extended their stubby, felted hands over his face, all 4 of them moving in unison. And then they stopped, and D-181 heard their voices. Well, not their voices exactly, but voices nonetheless. High-pitched, barely human, childish voices started whispering to him. They weren't coming from the dolls, but they could talk. D-181 was positive this is what they'd sound like.
You're doing such a great job! You're the nation's greatest asset! We love you, D-181! We love you!
All of these seemingly innocuous phrases were things said to D-181 while he was surrounded by the giant dolls. On paper, they sound encouraging, but the context of the situation and the way they were said made them anything but. And this would continue for what seemed like hours, with the dolls crowding D-181 and speaking to him in his paralyzed state, shouting the most deceptively kind things possible over and over again, all while D-181 was aware the entire time. But before he would wake from this awful dream, one of the instances would lift their stubby hand forward, directly hovering over D-181's arm, and the doll's appendage would caress him, squeezing and playing with his arm like it were a toy. By morning, when D-181 awoke from his dream, he felt like he was never asleep in the first place. and that he could remember every agonizing second of the past night's experience. This would continue almost every other night. As soon as D181 would fall asleep, the doll dream would occur again. As soon as he woke up, he'd feel like he got next to no sleep the night before. It was draining him and inhibiting D181 from performing his duties accordingly. One day during testing, D181 fell asleep in the middle of an experiment and dropped an important component to the object he was working with, which nearly set the entire facility on fire. After that, D181 knew that something had to change. D181 recognized the dolls. They were instances of SCP-2386, which he had worked with previously. In fact, it was the experiments with SCP-2386 that injured D181 on his right arm, causing an infectious spot to crop up. What caused this? And what exactly is SCP-2386? We'll get to all of that soon enough, but we need to focus on the dreams. It was 3 weeks into the dreams, 3 weeks since D181 was injured during testing, and 3 weeks since D181 had a good night's sleep. He met with Dr. Shaw, the head researcher in charge of SCP-2386 experimentation, and someone who worked with D181 many times. Dr. Shaw and D181 sat down and prepared an interview. She began,
"Good morning, D181. You say you've been having recurring dreams."
D181 shuffled in his seat a bit. "Yeah, hi Doc. Ever since I got this thing, it wasn't that bad at first." D181, of course, was talking about the red spot on his arm. Shaw asked him to explain the dreams, and D181 did. He explained how he would be in his bunk, feeling almost awake but not quite, when giant versions of SCP-2386 would make their way into the room. They'd gather around his bed and stare at him, shouting things and caressing his infected spot. Dr. Shaw listened intently. D181 was clearly shaken up from relaying the experience to another person. He continued, barely able to hold himself together. You see, something had changed the night before D181 spoke to Dr. Shaw. For the first time, the dream was altered. Actually, last night they did something different. Another one came in. It had something with it. Looked like a baby one. It was all wrapped up in this white cloth. They said something about wanting to show me what I was working towards. They pulled back the cloth over its head and it was a bug's head. Woke me right the heck up. A baby with a bug's head was definitely strange imagery, but Dr. Shaw was unsure what it all could mean. She knew SCP-2386 were insect-like, and with the way D181's infection was looking, her brain began concocting a strange but potentially true theory, one that wasn't looking good for D181. But before we get into that, let's talk about what SCP-2386 really is. They're known among Foundation personnel at Site-32 as Pink Ladies, and they are a diminutive species that outwardly resembles patchwork dolls made of traditional fabric. Think that creepy Raggedy Ann doll your grandmother has, but 10 times more degraded, a whole lot more pink, and straight up insectoid in nature. They're not as big as the ones in D181's dream, but they're actually as scary, with stitched-on faces and a pair of moth wings on their backs. In fact, the actual SCP-2386 instances range from only 7 to 9 centimeters tall. Autopsies on dead instances of SCP-2386 showed resemblances to human botflies and silkworms, two species of insects that are absolutely nasty. It is terrifying to imagine something so outwardly cuddly could look so downright ugly on the inside. But that's what SCP-2386 are. But don't try hugging them either. Their cotton fiber exoskeleton is as durable as it is gross, and they're not the kind of cuddly doll you'd want to take to bed at night. In the wild, SCP-2386 are found in hives, resembling similarly patterned seat cushions. Big mounds of cloth host to tons of these tiny terrors, with the biggest hive the Foundation ever came across being the size of a large sofa. These hives are commonly found near suburban environments, and sometimes even inside occupied housing. Imagine coming home to find a brand new sofa inside your house, and then realizing that it's actually home to thousands of SCP-2386 instances. When SCP-2386 leaves their colonies, it is primarily to feed on smaller insects and seek out hosts for reproductive purposes. Despite their cute but gross appearances, SCP-2386 become hostile if approached by males of any species and will target them accordingly. That's why Site-32 only employs male personnel for testing purposes. As soon as they're within range of a male subject, SCP-2386 will outstretch one of its appendages and extend a pair of scissor-like claws from it before swarming the male. This is what happened to D-181, which resulted in the red infected spot on his arm. Conversely, female subjects in the presence of SCP-2386 are treated entirely differently, with the instances caring for them, presenting them with small gifts, and attempting to play with them. During the spring and summer seasons, SCP-2386 will enter their mating season and cease their hostilities towards males. Instead, they'll treat them with the same level of kindness they do with females. But this kindness is just a front. When given the opportunity, SCP-2386 will slice a small incision into the male subject and pump them full of about 30 to 65 eggs underneath their skin. Within 24 hours, the incised area will resemble patterned cloth, and genetic tests reveal it to be composed of the same material as SCP-2386's hives. In the weeks that follow, this area will spread across the subject's body, and eventually, it will open to reveal fully grown adult instances of SCP-2386, who burst from the patchwork skin. Dr. Shaw recognized that this is what was happening to D-181, and immediately got him to Site-32's medical ward. D-181 was strapped down to the table and tried not to freak out over what he knew was about to happen. The dreams were acting as a warning, and SCP-2386 was clearly looking forward to having D-181 bear the next generation of insect dolls. Thankfully, Dr. Shaw caught the infection before the patchwork skin was able to fully take root, meaning that the eggs underneath D-181's skin were premature. Thankfully, there was still time. Surgery was carried out immediately, and the doctors weren't surprised to discover a colony of premature SCP-2386 eggs underneath D-181's arm. They were removed from the body and thrown into storage for further research purposes. D-181, after waking up from the surgery, thanked Dr. Shaw. At least now he wouldn't have to deal with those horrible dreams, and the stinging, swollen sensation underneath his arm. Unfortunately, he was still a D-Class personnel working for the Foundation, and would have many more intense experiences after this one. But D-181's gratefulness would soon subside. Within a few hours, D-181 began to ask Dr. Shaw if he could see SCP-2386's enclosure. He spent the past few weeks absolutely terrified of the species, but for whatever reason, he felt like he had unfinished business with the anomalies. He wanted to see them again. Dr. Shaw became suspicious and understandably denied D-181 entrance from the enclosure, but this wasn't enough. D-181 became violent and tried to force himself into the containment chamber. He needed to see them. He couldn't explain why, but he felt incomplete. Eventually, D-181 was subdued and returned to his quarters, but his symptoms continued throughout the weeks. He was depressed and frequently made reference to SCP-2386 as being lost or unrightfully taken away from him. To Dr. Shaw, what was happening was clear. D-181 had been affected mentally upon receiving the SCP-2386 eggs. This was a safety mechanism induced by the anomaly in case of birthing complications, so D-181 would feel compelled to receive another batch of eggs into his body if the first batch was lost or damaged. It was disgusting, and Shaw was positive it would subside after a few more weeks. But what kept her up at night wasn't the same dreams D-181 had, or the terror of SCP-2386. It was the image of D-181 scared and out of his mind, clawing that containment chamber door, begging to be used as a host for SCP-2386's next batch of eggs. As we all know, the SCP Foundation secures, contains, and protects the various anomalies under its custody. But their mission isn't limited to just grabbing the object and chucking it into a containment locker at the bottom of a classified site deep below the surface of the Earth. The Foundation wants to get a comprehensive, full understanding of all the strange items, creatures, and humanoids in its custody, because that's the only way to understand what they're capable of, what danger they pose, and how to effectively contain them. That much is logical. But the problem is that there's no global scientific community surrounding anomalies, at least not ones willing to cooperate with the Foundation. Perhaps the Chaos Insurgency or Global Occult Coalition have some scientists who have studied anomalies, or the various government agencies that know about the anomalous world like the Unusual Incidents Unit or Soviet GRUP. But for the most part, the Foundation is utterly alone when it comes to figuring out how these anomalies work, what they are, and how to combat them. So the Foundation does what any institution would do: experiments. Many of the Foundation's most important and iconic anomalies are defined by the experiments the white-coated scientists have performed on them, sometimes even using human subjects through the notorious and infamous D-Class program. Everyone knows about how SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy lizard, has been subjected to practically every known weapon and attack under the sun in an attempt to kill the highly dangerous, hateful predator. And who can forget SCP-914, the Clockworks, and the countless objects the Foundation has put through it on its 5 settings to see what it spits out. Needless to say, the Foundation's experiments are incredibly important to how the organization functions, so those SCPs that can offer lots of testing options are very treasured and prized, along with being iconic and legendary throughout the Foundation. Today we're going to be looking at one such anomaly, but not a dangerous, hostile, man-eating predator like SCP-682, or a mysterious eldritch machine like SCP-914. No, today we're going to be looking at something much more simpler than that: a coffee machine. Yes, today we're going to be inspecting SCP-294, affectionately referred to by guards and personnel as the coffee machine. Though you probably don't want to order a hot cup of joe in this coffee machine lest you, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The first thing you see when you open the SCP-294 file is its number, of course. Item 294, Object Class Euclid. The next thing you see is the image. If you were imagining a tiny little coffee maker before, this should get rid of that. SCP-294 is big, the kind of coffee machine you'd see in a factory break room. It's almost the size of a vending machine, and has a big colored window showing a few cups of coffee, along with the slots for cash and coins so drinkers can pay for their espressos. But the most notable feature on SCP-294 is the full keyboard on the front panel. It's a typical QWERTY keyboard, just like yours, with a spacebar and everything. Why on earth would a coffee machine need a keyboard? The special containment procedures paint an interesting picture, by which we mean there aren't any. SCP-294 doesn't need any special procedures, secret rituals, or complex machines to keep it contained. But it's still Euclid. So only personnel who have security clearance of level 2 or higher are allowed to interact with it at the moment. This is surprising when you realize that SCP-294 is currently being held not in an anomalous item locker or containment cell, but exactly where you'd expect to find a big coffee machine: a break room. Specifically the Site-19 second floor personnel break room. But it's not alone. It's monitored by 2 guards with level 3 clearance around the clock. For them, sitting in the break room all day guarding a coffee machine that can't move and is too heavy to lift has to be a pretty sweet gig, considering what other kinds of jobs are available at the Foundation. But all that raises even more mysteries. What the heck is up with this coffee machine? The description starts off obvious enough. Affirmed that yes, SCP-294 is indeed a standard coffee vending machine, but with the difference we all noticed earlier. Instead of a simple button list of options, it has a full keyboard on it, each button aligning with the letter on a real keyboard. And when someone slips 50 cents into the coin slot, quite a bargain for coffee if you ask me, the user gets a message on screen prompting them to enter the name of what liquid they'd like. You type it in on the keyboard, and that's that. The machine drops a little paper cup, and a nozzle shoots out 12 fluid ounces of whatever you requested. Pretty nifty, isn't it? But it gets niftier. Most people would only think to ask a coffee machine for, well, coffee. But SCP-294 accepts any liquid, and some things that aren't liquids. When the Foundation initially got their hands on it, they ran no less than 97 tests on it, after they realized they weren't just limited to espressos and cappuccinos. At first, any kind of liquid you could drink was requested. The researchers popped in requests for water, coffee, beer, soda, milkshakes, and out they came. Then they decided to get a little more creative. They started to request things you couldn't possibly drink, not if you wanted to stay alive. Sulfuric and hydrochloric acid, like the kind SCP-682 is suspended in. wiper fluid, motor oil. But SCP-294 stubbornly provided, even if the liquids would melt through the researchers' throats like a knife through butter. Then the researchers decided to apply some of their scientific knowledge. There are a lot of chemical compounds that don't usually exist in a liquid state on planet Earth's surface. They typed in nitrogen, iron, and glass, among others, and received shimmering liquids in paper cups. They sent them off to a lab for analysis and, wouldn't you know it, chemically identical to nitrogen, iron, and glass. But when they typed in diamond, no doubt wondering whether they'd found an infinite cash cow, they received an error message on the screen. It seemed that while SCP-294 could deliver substances that aren't usually in a liquid state on Earth's surface, it needed to be at least possible for the substance to be in a pure liquid form for SCP-294 to dispense it. Since diamond is only a mineral, it couldn't be dispensed. Then they tried to test something else, and got a slightly disturbing response on the small LCD display. Out of stock. It stopped responding to requests for over an hour, then made a small noise and began to accept requests again. It appears that the machine can take about 50 requests before needing to take an hour and a half to restock itself. And while only the machine is anomalous, the small 12-ounce paper cups it dispenses its liquids in seems remarkably hardy. Substances that would have eaten through paper instantly, like the sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid, had no effect on these little cups, though the same can be said for those that drank from them. One of the researchers had a great idea. Here was an anomaly that was practically harmless, and could be a great little way for the Foundation to scale back its budget a little bit. They proposed putting SCP-294 into the break room it currently resides in, both to more easily conduct experiments and to save money when agents and doctors came in for lunch and needed a quick drink, or in the mornings where everyone was looking for coffee to wake them up. With no good reason not to, the machine was put in the break room, but not long after, an unfortunate incident occurred. One with enough harm that it was deemed necessary that only personnel with security clearance interact with SCP-294. What could have happened to cause this? Did someone burn themselves on hot coffee? Did the vending machine accidentally crush someone? No. The reality is much darker. One morning in August of 2005, Agent Joseph, whose full name has been redacted to preserve their identity, went up to the vending machine in the break room, looking to get a hot cup of coffee to wake himself up between shifts. Another agent in the room who was on break at the time saw him and made a suggestion to find out what SCP-294 would do when given the colloquial name rather than the exact real name of a drink. They just wanted to see what would happen. So Agent Joseph slipped in 2 quarters and typed in a hot cup of Joe. Seconds after, he began sweating like a pig. He was feeling very hot, even though the break room was fully air-conditioned, and his skin began to flush. He then clutched his head, complaining that he was dizzy, and the whole room was spinning around before collapsing to the floor. The other agent immediately called the medical staff, who moved Agent Joseph to the infirmary and stabilized him. Once they made sure he wasn't in any real trouble, they also grabbed whatever SCP-294 had spit out. It was a disgusting, thick, reddish-brown liquid with a strong stench, and when they ran the labs on it, they confirmed it was exactly what they thought it was: a mixture of blood, tissue, bone marrow, cerebrospinal fluid, and other bodily fluids that was an exact DNA match for Agent Joseph. SCP-294 somehow managed to literally liquefy 12 ounces from the agent's body before producing them into a cup. This offered a clue. Maybe it stole the liquids it was asked for from the nearest source. In any case, the agent was released after a few weeks of bed rest and care to make sure he wasn't further injured, and both involved agents were reprimanded. With the knowledge of how accidentally dangerous SCP-294 can be, who can blame the Foundation for wanting to keep a careful lid on it? Researchers were curious, though, and received clearance to test the SCP's abilities to retrieve specific liquids from long distances. With an O5's approval and oversight, they input a cup of SCP-075's secretion. SCP-075, the corrosive snail, is exactly what it sounds like: a gross little creature that secretes a highly caustic acid, capable of melting almost anything. Without fail, the coffee machine dispensed the secretion into the cup, and the cup stayed perfectly intact. But at the very same time, in SCP-075's cell, the creature woke up and began secreting acid that immediately disappeared. All in all, about 12 ounces, the same amount in the cup. Based off of these results, further testing with SCP-294 was approved. One researcher tried punching in a request for a cup of gold. What came out was a small paper cup of molten gold that quickly cooled to room temperature. Asking for cups of silver and platinum produced similar results, but based off of previous tests, it seemed clear that the machine wasn't creating precious metals, so much as siphoning them off from somewhere else. The next request was a strange one, a cup of anti-water. The machine took a moment, then printed a small message on its LCD display, out of range. This confirmed that the machine couldn't produce substances that didn't actually exist, and couldn't break physics to get its materials by peering into alternate universes, dimensions, or realities. After that, the researchers tested for diamond, and got the result that you already know of, an out-of-range error. Some more investigation showed that all solid substances that don't have a liquid form get this error, but asking for a cup of liquid carbon produced exactly that, because liquid carbon isn't the same thing as a diamond, though both are made of carbon. SCP-294 clearly has more knowledge of chemistry than some of us. Then the researchers created an entirely new drink, made of bleach, various sodas, protein powders, and spices. They blended it together and put it in a jar across the room from SCP-294. When requested, the amount of the liquid in the cup was missing from the jar, proving that SCP-294 doesn't actually create its own liquids. But how does SCP-294 react when presented with a more subjective request? One researcher asked for the best drink I've ever had. After a moment, the paper cup filled with something that looked like cola, but the researcher said it tasted like a drink he had years ago at a party, and that he'd always remembered as his favorite drink, though he couldn't say what was in it. But that was a subjective test, and the researchers repeated it with a different subject. When an agent also requested the best drink I've ever had, the machine produced a simple Vienna lager with a label showing a group of people drinking it at the beach and no brand name. The agent confirmed that the best drink he ever had was a Vienna lager at the beach with his friends. So SCP-294 could not only read people's minds, it can read memories they don't even know they still have. Another one they tried was something Cassie will like, referencing SCP-085, the young girl who lived in a drawn-on world. The cup dispensed was completely empty, but it had a small drawing printed on the side of a soda glass with brown and white things floating on top of each other. The researchers presented the cup to Cassie, and were told by her it was a chocolate banana milkshake, and a delicious one at that. A cup of music was a strange request, and produced an even stranger result. A clear, odorless carbonated drink that tasted vaguely alcoholic. When drunk, subjects said they could feel it, and started showing an affinity to music, being able to sing and dance to a rhythm when they had no sense of rhythm or were tone-deaf before. Whether SCP-294 can produce even more abstract concepts is still under study, but was interrupted by the next test. An unfortunate containment breach incident at Site-19 left several personnel trapped in the break room, heavily injured while MTFs fought to re-establish control over the site. An agent typed in a cup of medical knowledge, and the machine quickly produced a green liquid. After drinking it, the agent was able to treat the injuries of their fellow personnel consistent with standard first responder practices, and was commended for their bravery. But their knowledge didn't stick around after the breach, and attempts to recreate the liquid failed. They decided that SCP-294 broke its own rules for self-preservation in the emergency, implying that it's not only sentient, it is intelligent. A doctor using SCP-294 made a request close to him, my life story. While nowhere close to a drink, SCP-294 seemed to accept the input, until it started shaking violently and making odd noises. It remained in this new state for about 3 minutes, then returned to normal, spitting out a completely opaque black fluid, like tar, in a cup. Despite the strange reaction, the doctor drank the fluid, and immediately informed the others he was now able to remember everything that had ever happened to him, from the smallest childhood event to the most important events in his adult life. He excused himself and disappeared into his office. The next time the staff saw him 2 days later, he was carrying an autobiography 600 pages long. Then the researchers decided to try their luck and input "surprise me." The resulting solution was a cup containing what seemed to be regular water, right until a researcher touched it. It was just water, all right, but it had been superheated to 200 degrees Celsius while remaining in liquid form. The moment someone touched it, bang! It violently evaporated into steam, spraying boiling water everywhere. Not only does SCP-294 have intelligence, it has a sense of humor, albeit a quite rude one. The next 3 requests were for blood, namely blood of the Smilodon or saber-toothed tiger, of the passenger pigeon, and of founding father Thomas Jefferson. But the only thing SCP-294 produced were out-of-range errors, confirming it can't take liquids that don't exist anymore. But in the next test, blood was received from wolves, saliva was received from horses, urine was received from koalas, and cerebral spinal fluid was received from Phoebromus pattersoni, a rodent that went extinct some 8 million years ago. Though if SCP-294 is working according to its own rules, it means that there may be still one in the wild somehow. For the next test, the researchers decided to get back to the scientific roots of it all. They made a request for a cup of D-151839's leukemia, knowing that the D-class in question had a very advanced case of cancer. The machine outputted it without any trouble, and analysis of the liquid showed it contained cancer cells that matched the D-class's DNA. But another request for the same spat out an out-of-range error. What's more, a medical checkup on the D-class revealed that their tumor was completely gone. But unfortunately, it was only a short-term fix. The cancer cells recurred within 2 weeks of the test. SCP-294 initially just seemed like a boring magic vending machine. But it was only after the extensive experimentation that you just saw a shortened log of that the SCP Foundation was able to discern its true nature. It wasn't an unthinking object. It was sentient, intelligent, and even a little sarcastic, though none of that stopped it from doing its job, providing people with a hot cup of whatever they needed to drink. Just make sure you type in your request very carefully.
In 1914, an Archduke of Austria-Hungary was shot by a Serbian nationalist. This led, after a series of nations signing treaties with other nations, to one of the bloodiest conflicts ever fought. A war that was unlike any that had been fought at the time. Trench combat, mud, and sandbags, newer deadlier advancements in the art of warfare, vile, incurable, and fatal diseases, and months upon months of misery, all while trapped in dark, dank dugouts. The Great War, the First World War. It's gone by many names since its ceasefire in 1918, and while there aren't many left of the generation that remembers it, there are still plenty of scars left on the world that remind us of the horrors. But there's one that seems to be keeping those wounds fresh, reminding us that war is, indeed, hell, as that rough beast slouches towards its destination. This is SCP-2574, what appears from the outside to be nothing more than a stone sculpture of a lion comprised of sandstone and living tissue. Standing at around 12 meters tall, SCP-2574 is much more than a mere statue. In fact, it is a living creature. After all, this is the SCP Foundation we're talking about here, where inanimate objects are rarely inanimate at all, or will at least possess some form of anomalous properties setting apart anything ordinary, and thus drawing the interest of the Foundation. SCP-2574 is similar in that regard, and not just for being a living statue creature. For one, the anomaly is capable of movement, albeit at a gradual rate that only progresses between 3 and 5 kilometers per day. Attempts by the Foundation to slow or halt the movement of SCP-2574 have been so far unsuccessful, as it seems that any obstacle placed in its path are unable to deter it. This includes both man-made and naturally occurring obstructions, meaning there is little that can be deployed to keep SCP-2574 physically contained. Even if a body of water is in its path, the entity can swim at a rate of between 2 and 3 kilometers per day, and will normally either crush or climb over any obstacle on land. At the previous annual budgeting meeting, the top minds of the Foundation's accounting department revealed to an infuriated O5 council that SCP-2574 had been responsible for an estimated total of $25.3 million in damages since its discovery. The second most pressing matter raised during that presentation was that 112 deaths and a further 625 injuries the anomaly had also caused. Despite pleas from the Ethics Committee, the Foundation accountants were still adamant that the cost of damages was more significant. Now, a number of prevailing questions might be plaguing you regarding SCP-2574. For one, what does this creature want? If it has freedom of movement and can't be physically obstructed by the Foundation, then is it just aimlessly wandering free and causing wanton destruction? Or does it have a specific want or goal it seeks to attain? And for another, what does an almost 40-foot-tall lion have to do with World War I? Well, it might surprise you to know that SCP-2574 has everything to do with the Great War. Literally everything. And as for a goal, it has one, or rather it has a specific destination it seems to be gradually heading towards. And if it makes it all the way there, it could spell disaster for the entire globe. In fact, it could plunge us back into one of the most devastating conflicts the world has ever seen. Can you guess which one? SCP-2574 possesses a wide array of latent anomalous effects, beyond its general functionality and movement. Above the sandstone mine creature, it is constantly surrounded by a flock of around 6,000 birds of prey. Any that find themselves flying into the path of SCP-2574 are assimilated into the growing flock, designated as SCP-2574-1. The mass of birds is fixated on attacking SCP-2574, swooping low to strike at its smooth muscle tissue with using their beaks and talons. This, however, seems to do little to deter SCP-2574 from making progress, as the anomaly constantly regenerates from physical damage it incurs from SCP-2574-1. Perhaps the most notable and noticeable of SCP-2574's anomalous properties is the effect it has on its surroundings as it progresses towards its destination. The area around SCP-2574 will undergo a physical transformation in response to the presence of the lion. This transformation results in the nearby region temporarily becoming a World War I-era combat zone. The ground below becomes riddled with trenches carved through the earth. Thick, muddy bogs and coiled, razor-sharp nets of barbed wire litter the area. The change triggered by SCP-2574 is hardly just a cosmetic one either. The Foundation have observed a number of First World War-related manifestations that occur in the wake of SCP-2574. Man-made landmasses like trenches and dugouts will appear nearby, the front lines reappearing after more than a century. Weaponry from the area is also present following the arrival of SCP-2574, and this isn't just limited to firearms. World War I was one of the earliest large-scale conflicts in history, wherein both sides deployed aerial attacks through the use of biplanes, as well as chemical warfare. As a result, signs of these can also be found whenever SCP-2574 is nearby. But again, the transformation SCP-2574 brings about is not just limited to recreating battlefields. What some of you may not know is the Great War did not so much revolve around a core idealistic difference between both sides as its successor did. Instead, the First World War was a geopolitical grudge match between large global superpowers, attempting to make grandiose displays of their amassed military strength. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria at the hands of a Serbian extremist group was the catalyst that set off a chain reaction of events that ultimately led to war. As a result of this, SCP-2574's anomalous influence also extends to the social and political state of the areas it enters. A country that the Sandstone Leonine entity enters will suffer a rapid change in its local population's mentality. The ordinary people living there will start to experience a great degree of discontent towards their government, while the ruling powers of said country will increase its use of force against its own civilians. This effect is more noticeably potent when SCP-2574 interacts with countries that were directly involved in the First World War, increasing levels of civil unrest and discontentment among the population. These are often countered with worryingly increased levels of police brutality, along with governments enacting aggressive foreign policies and sometimes antagonizing other countries, as if they are eager to fight. These effects don't necessarily worsen the closer SCP-2574 gets to a particular country, but do seem to increase the more it approaches its predicted destination. And where is that, you may ask? The Foundation have calculated that based on SCP-2574's trajectory since its emergence back in 2012, the entity is headed for the city of Sarajevo, the capital city of Bosnia and Herzegovina. What possible reason could SCP-2574 have for wanting to venture towards this specific Bosnian city? Well, one cursory glance at the history of Sarajevo will give you the answer. It's where the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand took place, the event commonly attributed with starting the First World War. The transformative effects SCP-2574 has on its surroundings began when the Leonine Leviathan first appeared and commenced its journey towards Sarajevo on December 24, 2012. Since then, the SCP Foundation has been closely monitoring the sandstone creature's movements and attempting to log all of the anomalous effects it has had over the course of making its way closer to the site of Franz Ferdinand's assassination. Over 5,000 kilometers away, to the east of Kazakhstan's capital Astana, SCP-2574 caused an unusual World War I anomalous effect. Any written works published in either Russian or Kazakh began to randomly feature passages from Irish poet W.B. Yeats. These extracts from his body of work range from single sentences to entire poems being featured in other writers' publications, regardless of author or genre. Yeats, for anyone unfamiliar, was widely considered one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. However, unlike the authors of numerous poems and songs to come out of the First World War, W.B. Yeats was never directly involved in the conflict itself and didn't write much about it, barring a few notable exceptions, but more on him in a moment. When SCP-2574 approached Russia, things started to escalate. Clouds of deadly chlorine gas, an early World War I chemical weapon, began forming in rural areas throughout Europe that couldn't be dispersed for days at a time. As soon as the towering anomaly got close enough, Russian military forces began launching a series of drone strikes and aerial bombardments targeting SCP-2574. When these attacks failed, tensions mounted with bordering countries, the situation only getting worse when it was discovered through an intelligence leak that Russia was planning a nuclear strike against the creature, a move that likely could have spelled disaster for the neighboring countries. SCP-2574, of course, sustained no damage and continued on its course. Given that they couldn't physically contain SCP-2574, the Foundation was forced to think outside of the box when it came to coming up with some kind of solution. There were already too many eyewitnesses aware of the Leonine Leviathan's existence to consider administering amnestics, even on a large scale. The fact was, too many people already knew about SCP-2574 and would make such a move pointless. The best that the Foundation could do to combat, if not counteract, the effects of SCP-2574 was to work directly with governments affected by the creature's World War I transformative effects, to try and repair the damage left in the anomaly's wake, and ease the tension and violence it caused. It became the Foundation's job to deter any country planning an armed military response to the presence of SCP-2574, as any such strike would endanger both their military and civilian populations, while causing no damage to the anomaly. In the interest of trying to solve the problems posed by SCP-2574 reverting parts of Europe to hellish First World War-era battlefields, the Foundation made a rare agreement to collaborate with another large organization specializing in the anomalous, the Global Occult Coalition. Working directly with the GOC, their goal was to create a large-scale memetic countermeasure that would effectively reset the toll SCP-2574 had exacted on global psychology by altering people's temperaments and creating mass political unrest as it progressed towards the Bosnian capital. However, given the tense history between the SCP Foundation and the Global Occult Coalition, their attempts at creating a memetic countermeasure are still ongoing, since neither group wants the other to engage them in full-scale mimetic warfare. As such, the proposed countermeasure will consist of 2 parts, with neither organization being able to replicate the other's half. Meanwhile, SCP-2574's progress across Europe was responsible for a number of other significant changes, physically, socially, and politically recreating the conditions of the First World War. Poppies, a flower that has since become synonymous with the remembrance of the conflict, began to grow in regions within Russia where they wouldn't naturally occur. This included within urban locations, the red flowers sprouting in and around buildings. As a result of such a high-profile anomaly causing such widespread unrest to spread, a number of religious cults centered around SCP-2574 began to form. While the living descendants of World War I veterans began suffering from vivid hallucinations that depicted their ancestors' first-hand experience of the fighting, these cults began to amass more and more of those affected by SCP-2574. The SCP Foundation was able to observe some of the sermons delivered by these religious cults, who appeared to view the public appearances of SCP-2574 as signs of an impending apocalypse.
"Come to us and embrace your salvation,"
one cult leader exclaimed in a sermon.
"Discover the words of the prophet Yates, who spoke this sacred truth that all of history is a spiral, and that we have spiraled outwards towards chaos. Learn the true nature of the Second Coming."
It appeared that some of these cults viewed the poetry of W.B. Yeats as prophetic in regards to SCP-2574. They would often reference the Second Coming, which, interestingly, was the name of one of his poems written in the aftermath of World War I. Yeats's The Second Coming refers to a rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem. The SCP Foundation has since uncovered some erratic writings made by the poet before his death that allude to Bethlehem, despite no record existing of him ever traveling there. It is believed that Yeats somehow figured out what SCP-2574 was, and that the closer it gets to its destination, the more civilization will spiral further out of control towards total, all-consuming chaos. Further research by the Foundation also uncovered a testimony made by Gavrilo Princip, the Serbian man responsible for assassinating Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, and thus sparking the First World War. Princip seems to have had some knowledge about SCP-2574, and apparently killed the Archduke as a way to begin the creature's journey in order to make society more chaotic. With SCP-2574 progressing worryingly closer to the site of Franz Ferdinand's assassination, further chaos rapidly began to spread. Anarchic sentiments took hold of most of Europe, leading to an increased rate of violent encounters between civilians and police in many countries, including Ireland, France, Great Britain, and Italy, with a number of these experiencing widespread rioting in their major population centers. Any government or political party compelled by SCP-2574 to openly espouse the same anarchist sentiments were soon seeing a rapid increase in their public approval, gaining more popularity in polls than their opposition. As a result of these heightened tensions between the public and the government of their countries, assassination attempts of politicians saw an alarming increase of around 60%. SCP-2574 caused countries that had existing hostile relations to engage in armed skirmishes at their borders, with at least one of these battles occurring every 2 weeks, and each time threatening to spark a much larger scale conflict. Thanks to the anomaly's effects, the international tensions, dissolving alliances between countries, and adoption of nationalism, which were all factors leading to the start of the Great War, were beginning to rapidly spread once again. By the time SCP-2574 was around 550 kilometers from Sarajevo, people began experiencing injuries common among soldiers during World War I. Many patients would die during surgery, only for their bodies to disappear shortly afterwards. Conflict erupted between Ireland and England, and as SCP-2574 entered Bosnia and Herzegovina, many began to report suffering intense dreams about the anomaly. A number of these reports seem to state that SCP-2574 was attempting to communicate with them, and multiple websites began logging the Sandstone Lion's appearance in their dreams. and things will only get worse the closer SCP-2574 gets to Sarajevo. SCP-2574 contains the raw energy of World War I, one of the most catastrophic events in human history, a global conflict with a death toll in the tens of millions. The SCP Foundation estimates it'll reach the site of Franz Ferdinand's assassination within a month. And from that point, given the effect it's had on the rest of Europe, there's only one likely outcome when that rough beast slouches towards its ultimate destination: war. SCP-682 had escaped containment, and it was all hands on deck at the SCP Foundation to try and stop the creature's rampage. All unarmed personnel were running to escape before 682 had a chance to rip them apart, as the security team bravely fought to incapacitate the hard-to-destroy reptile long enough to return him to his acid tank. 682 was on an all-out offensive, stomping through the SCP's item gallery and spewing acid at anyone who came within range. People, items, and parts of the room alike were melting and sizzling as 682 attacked. It was an absolute bloodbath, and you'd have to be insane to try and fight back against it. However, one being remained unfazed by the chaos, and stood proud in the face of the omnicidal monster. It was another SCP, one who had broken free from its glass display case in the commotion.
Who dares disturb the Prime Minister Sinister?
It said in a high, tinny voice.
I shall rip your eyes from their sockets and force you to eat them.
SCP-682 stopped to see who had threatened him. It was almost laughable that this thing had dared to make such a violent threat, because there was no way that this little thing would be able to stand up to the unkillable 682. But its size didn't stop it from trying to pick a fight all the same. The SCP was a tiny robot made from junk, which looked more like a sculpture made from scrap that was found on the side of the road than a functional automaton. Its head was made of an upside-down voltmeter, giving it the appearance of a smiling face, and its arms were made of wrenches. It was capable of walking around, though it seemed to have difficulty moving as it was very top-heavy. It shook a rusty fist at SCP-682 and continued to threaten him, shouting,
"You do not know the fury you have unleashed! Robo-Lord the Destructor will end you!"
SCP-682 swiped at the robot, annoyed by its continued attempts to antagonize him. The robot toppled over and struggled to stand again, but when it did, it ran for 682's feet. It started to grab at 682's toes, hitting them with its wrench hands. As you might expect, this had almost no effect on 682.
You do realize you are weak, pathetic,
said 682, raising his claw to get a better look at the annoying little robot. It responded,
"Lies and slander! The Mayor of Mayhem is the most powerful being in existence!"
before promptly losing its grip on 682's claw and falling to the floor. Now 682 was really getting tired of this thing. He prepared to swipe at it again, this time using his full strength, which would certainly smash the robot to pieces. But luckily for the robot, its pestering had distracted 682 just long enough for the Foundation's security to sneak up on him. Before 682 had a chance to smash the robot, the Foundation fired on him with a volley of rockets, reducing him to a misshapen lump. The security team collected up 682's remains, ready to put them back into a backup acid tank. But the task was made slightly more difficult by the fact that the robot was running around underfoot, trying in vain to now attack them instead. What was this strange little robot that thought it could attack the unkillable lizard 682? Meet SCP-1370. Appropriately nicknamed the Pesterbot by Foundation personnel. Pesterbot is a small robot made of junk that displays sentience and the ability to move despite having no power source. Everything about SCP-1370 defies common sense. The voltmeter that serves as its head contains no sensors, but it seems unable to see if the voltmeter is covered. Its arms and legs are made of wrenches, and its wooden torso contains a speaker which it communicates through a tinny, monotone voice. Pesterbot lives in SCP Gallery 27, in a glass display case which is 125 centimeters tall, 50 centimeters wide, and 75 centimeters long. Level 2 personnel and higher are allowed to remove the robot from containment at their discretion, but penalties will be incurred for anyone who doesn't return it to its case. Due to its impractical top-heavy design, Pesterbot falls over frequently when it walks around. This led the Foundation to believe that he was created as an art project and was later somehow imbued with anomalous properties. rather than being made with the intent of being sentient. Pesterbot has demonstrated a high capacity for learning, having been taught how to speak in English, French, and Latin. However, the major factor hampering attempts to further test its intelligence has nothing to do with its robotic processing power. No, it's because of its poor attitude. Pesterbot's encounter with SCP-682 and the cockiness it expressed in the moment wasn't an aberration. This SCP really believes it's a killing machine, and as a result it will pick a fight with anyone and anything that moves. This even includes its own reflection. And as a result, the glass of its container must be made as non-reflective as possible to prevent the robot from damaging the case or itself in attempts to fight its mirror self. Though its most commonly used nickname in the Foundation is Pesterbot, SCP-1370 also goes by a variety of self-given epithets, including Doombot 2000, Robolord the Destructor, and Darthclaw Killflex. It can be made to add new names to this list through encouragement by staff, and one time they even managed to add the name Pesterbot, as well as the even more ridiculous Patheticon the Garglemost, to its lexicon of names. As you may have surmised, Pesterbot is classified as safe and is treated by most SCP Foundation employees as a humorous oddity rather than a legitimate threat. Many tests have been done on Pesterbot, and they've all conclusively determined that the robot is incapable of inflicting any damage to its opponents. In fact, Pesterbot is more a danger to itself than to anything around it, both because it's incredibly clumsy and awkward, and because it frequently picks fights with other SCPs who are far more powerful than it. One such scenario that could have gone far worse for Pesterbot than it did was its encounter with SCP-846, also known as Robodude, one of the many Dr. Wondertainment products currently kept in Foundation containment. Robodude is an ordinary-looking toy robot that, upon request, can produce up to 350 robo-accessories that function as real weapons. Robodude can deploy everything from a rocket launcher to a flamethrower to a gun that shoots out an unknown species of insect that can chew through wood. However, Robodude seems to not be sentient, and is unable to use these weapons unless asked to. That ultimately worked out in the favor of Pesterbot. During another SCP-682 escape, the two robots were brought into contact as they both had been broken out of their respective containment spaces during the brouhaha. Robodude, searching for a robo-pal to play with, came upon Pesterbot, who immediately started spouting its usual overdramatic threats.
I am the Crushmaster, doomed to all I survey,
Pesterbot said.
Gaze upon my might and weep. Identify yourself that I might know whose destruction I shall sow.
Robodude, not programmed to know how to respond to such a statement, simply responded by asking Pesterbot if it wanted to play. Pesterbot continued to trash-talk Robodude, until Robodude decided the best way to play with its new pal was to engage it in its robo-dance mode. Pesterbot accepted the challenge, saying, "Activate all that you wish, but your fate is sealed. The Kilotron cannot be defeated. I shall render you unto dust with my mad dancing skills." The two robots proceeded to engage in a dance battle, which the awkwardly shaped Pesterbot failed miserably at. While Robodude was a competent dancer, Pesterbot could only gyrate pathetically before it fell over and rolled around the ground, hopelessly out of time to the music coming from Robodude's speakers. The song ended, and Robodude declared, "Robo-dance is complete, Robo-pal." Pesterbot was unable to accept its failure, and replied,
"Ha, pathetic one. You have been schooled in the art of the dance by none other than the Meccano Basher, scourge of 1,000 worlds. Kneel before me before I end your worthless existence."
Robodude, unimpressed with Pesterbot's poor sportsmanship, deployed its hydrogen cannon, which it was programmed to do whenever it detected a sore loser. Fortunately for Pesterbot, hydrogen cannon was just the name for Robodude's water pistol. While Pesterbot will attempt to fight anything that moves, the truth is this robot will attack virtually anything it perceives as being even slightly alive. This is perhaps best illustrated by one of the tests of Pesterbot's abilities that involved putting a small speaker at the base of a potted houseplant and speaking through it from another room. The plant was placed across from Pesterbot in the testing chamber, and the interaction was monitored by researchers from outside. Researcher Davies spoke through the speaker in the plant pot. He asked Pesterbot if he could hear him, and it answered,
"Who dares? All souls will burn. You will feel the sharp sting of my wrath. Identify yourself so that I may sing damnation upon you as you die."
The robot began approaching the plant. Davies, speaking as the plant, identified himself.
I am a split-leaf philodendron, a semi-woody shrub with large glossy leaves. At this point, he had to try very hard not to laugh at the absurdity of this test and the robot's reaction. He continued, "These leaves can grow up to 3 feet long." Pesterbot used its wrench to try and wrestle with the leaves, but was bested by the mighty plant and unable to cause any damage. Enraged by its failure, it said, "Your mockery spells your doom. I have arrived. You will be crushed betwixt my digits." Pesterbot then fell over and was unable to right itself. It struggled and spent 6 minutes trying to stand before its flailing knocked over the plant, which did nothing to help and in fact pinned the robot to the ground. It was at this point that the researchers, who had taken time to compose themselves after several laughing fits, entered the chamber and removed Pesterbot in order to place it back in its containment case. Despite how non-threatening Pesterbot is, there is actually one situation in the Foundation's history where it actually posed a somewhat serious threat. When mobile task forces were sent in to rescue survivors of the events at Site-13, also known as SCP-1730, they were attacked by alternate universe versions of a variety of creatures kept in Foundation containment. One of these creatures was Pesterbot, who in that universe somehow gained control of a larger mechanical body constructed of discarded pieces of machinery. It threw other pieces of metal scrap at the task force as they tried to leave the site, shouting in a much deeper and more intimidating voice, "I am reborn to breathe devastation upon this fetid earth. Pitiful humans, you will feel the dark sting of my never-ending torment." Members of the task force could see the original Pesterbot body on top of the larger metal construct, waving its arms madly. The task force opened fire to little effect. Pesterbot tossed another piece of scrap at them, just narrowly missing. One task force member threw a frag grenade at the robot, which it caught, blowing up its hand. Another one was able to jump into the air and reach the tiny robot atop the larger body, knocking it against the wall and shattering it. Even in the reality where Pesterbot was able to build itself a larger body, it still ultimately wasn't able to put up that much of a fight. Poor Pesterbot, doomed to be a failure in this and apparently every other reality. That's the story of SCP-1370, also known as Pesterbot, one of the most hilariously harmless anomalous entities that the Foundation currently has in containment. Perhaps one day, he'll achieve his goal of conquering the universe. He just has to figure out how to conquer his toy box first. Before we get into today's video, let's talk about you, viewer. Yes, you. The fourth wall can't protect you from SCP Explained. It's time to talk posture. Look at you, curled up like a human question mark. Do you have no respect for your spine? The more you slouch, the more you'll resemble some kind of obscene humanoid shrimp. And it won't just affect your confidence, it'll affect your health too. You're at risk of scoliosis, joint degeneration, incontinence, constipation, headaches, digestive issues, a whole bevy of health problems. And all because you can't be bothered to just sit up straight. So straighten up, hold that pose, keep it through the rest of the video. Because if you ever cross paths with this anomaly, the moment your shoulders start to droop could be the moment it notices you. I knew someone who didn't take that advice. His name was Harry, a down-on-his-luck type who bounced from job to job, couch to couch, roll to roll. And of course, he was always slouching. You could probably picture him, even if he wasn't on screen right now. The thin frame, the long stringy hair, the baggy hoodie will join him sloping down the back streets, feeling like this world did him wrong, that he didn't have the opportunities that others had. Society has never done him any favors, so why should he play by society's rules? That's how he started his habit of petty theft, the easiest way to make a little extra money for his other habits. We'll leave that part to your imagination. On the day Harry encountered SCP-1196, he was boosting radios from parked cars on the edge of town. It was so easy to begin with. Just walking from car to car, trying the door handles, and punishing any unlucky fools who thought, "What's the harm in leaving my car unlocked just this once?" From there, it was taking candy from a baby. He'd use a flathead screwdriver to jimmy the radio out of the dash. He'd then take it to one of the local pawnbrokers who were more than happy to look the other way and play fence for a little extra scratch. Of course, when reports of his activities started to pop up on local community Facebook groups and on police bulletin boards, his job got a lot harder. Folks got more consistent in locking their cars and setting alarms.
But that had only been a minor setback. He started bringing a long metal ruler in a duffel bag on jobs with him. You slide that down past the window and into the door. It's easy enough to disengage any lock. After the satisfying click of the lock mechanism inside the door, Harry swung it open and climbed inside. His back, predictably, hunched. He whipped out his trusty flathead and carefully worked out the radio with bomb squad precision. Yes, that's it. Easy does it. It didn't take him long to get the radio out. He'd become a seasoned professional, but his comfort with the process made him less careful, and he didn't notice the unmarked police cruiser rolling up on him until the flashing lights and sirens flared up. Harry panicked and dropped his screwdriver, sending it into that liminal crevasse between the gear shift and the seats. There was no time to reach in there and fish it back out. He needed to get out of there, and he needed to get out now. He hugged the radio to his chest and made a mad dash through a nearby alley, trying to blank out the calls of "Stop! Police! Drop the radio." Like hell he was going to drop the radio and make all this trouble for nothing. He ran as fast as he could, sneakers squeaking against wet pavement. As he fled, he tried not to think about whether they could lift his fingerprints from the screwdriver and send him down like that. In the panic of the chase, Harry tripped and felt a sharp pain against his chest. He'd fallen onto the radio and shattered it beneath him. No, all its valuable components scattered across the blacktop. It was a Sirius XM. That could have gotten him real money. But he couldn't afford to mourn. He could still hear the sirens and frantic footsteps coming from behind him. Damn it. Harry dragged himself up to his feet, adrenaline allowing him to ignore the pain and disappointment of the fall, and ran for it. It was a full 20 minutes of running before he eventually lost them, and the whole affair left him feeling exhausted and depressed. He didn't want to be a petty thief. He wanted to be a successful thief. And the way he saw it, if he ever wanted that to happen, he needed to upgrade to bigger scores than boosting car radios for a little spending money. There had to be a better way. And that's when the better way fell, almost magically, into his lap. In the alley that he'd found himself in, he noticed a business he never realized was even there before. Dr. Dopp's Chiropractors. One of his mom's boyfriends had been a chiropractor, and he drove a Mercedes-Benz. Clearly, there was money in this game. But what attracted him to this particular business was another sign out front. By appointment only. Cash, closed on weekends. And just like that, the plan unfurled in Harry's addled mind like some enchanted scroll. A cash-only business would be perfect for robbery, and if he waited for the weekend, there's a decent chance he could make off with the entire week's proceeds. He'd make the kind of money in one score that'd take him months of stealing radios. It was perfect. But he knew that if he wanted to stop being a small-time criminal, he needed to stop thinking small-time. He needed to start thinking like a real master thief, and that's why he began his recon mission, keeping an eye on the building over the course of the week, getting a sense of its comings and goings, maybe even see where the money is being kept. Harry felt like a real smooth operator watching from a secluded position across the road, eating out of a large bag of Lay's chips. But as the days stretched on and the weekend drew closer, it started to occur to Harry that something was actually kind of weird about this place. It had no shortage of clients, which definitely boded well for his big score come Saturday. But so many of those clients seemed to come after dark, and maybe it was lapses in his own concentration, but he could swear that some of them never seemed to leave. Of course, there was a simple explanation for that. They were probably just leaving through the back door. But what he couldn't account for was the strange behavior of the man he assumed to be Dr. Dops himself. He was an older man who'd come and go from the office frequently, but every time he came back, he'd bring a chair with him. Sometimes a cheap folding chair, or a chair you might expect to see in a doctor's waiting room. Other times, older wooden chairs, or ornate chairs you might find in an antique store. The building wasn't even that big, so where was he putting all these chairs? And why would a chiropractor need more chairs than an auditorium? It didn't make any kind of sense. But Harry didn't care. Not really, no more than a passing casual curiosity. All that mattered was that Dr. Dops was clearly cleaning up, and soon enough, Dr. Dops' good luck would become his own. Saturday rolled around and night fell. Dr. Dops hadn't appeared at the office at all that day, so by Harry's calculations, it was the perfect time to strike. He'd invested in a small battery-powered hand drill that he could use to destroy the lock on the front door, and from there, the spoils would be all his. Harry closed the front door behind him and slithered in. It seemed even more cramped and old-fashioned on the inside, with only 2 chairs out in the waiting room and a desk where he assumed the receptionist would normally sit. But where would Dobbs keep the money? Harry snuck through the building with his trusty flashlight, scanning for anything that might be of interest. He found a number of sealed boxes marked with the word "Menses" written in black marker pen on the side of the cardboard, but they only seemed to be filled with glue sticks, not money. Harry was beginning to worry that this whole thing was going to be a bust. And then he scanned the flashlight a little to the left, where it caught the pallid glare of Dr. Dobbs staring at him. Before Harry could run or offer some word of explanation, the twin metal prongs of a cattle prod pressed up against his chest. When Harry woke up, everything was dark, and his body was laid out across wet earth and ground. He still had his flashlight and switched it on, casting a thin cone of light across the room around him. He was in a basement, it seemed, dungeon-like with slimy old walls and a dirt floor. Had he been kidnapped? Was that what this was? Was this room underneath Dr. Dobbs's building? Oh God. Had Dobbs called the cops and was just holding him in here until they arrived? This was bad. This was really, really bad. He tried scanning the room to look for some kind of exit or even a vulnerability in one of the walls that perhaps he could exploit. That's when he heard the quiet rustling in the room around him, the movement of something skittering across the dirt. He panicked and whipped around, the light following his gaze, until it fell upon a chair. One of the very chairs that he'd seen Dr. Dobbs carrying into the building earlier in the week. Was he keeping them down here in the basement? And then the chair talked in a voice that reminded him of Mickey Mouse.
Fix your posture.
What?
Stand up straight.
And with that, the chair skittered away, its legs moving like that of an insect. And it wasn't the only one. Harry turned, following the noise, and saw the others, all the chairs that he'd watched Dr. Dobbs meticulously carry in over the course of the previous week. All those chairs moving around like a freakish, impossible colony of bugs. The basement was a chair nest. Harry did what he could to get out, feeling over every patch of the walls as the minutes passed. Over time, the chairs kept skittering around, barking orders and judgments at him.
Stand up straight.
Stand up straight!
Their voices were getting louder, deeper, until Harry had been in there for an hour, waiting worriedly for the police. But poor Harry didn't know. The police had never been called. He screamed when the chairs set upon him, striking and stabbing with their harsh, angular edges of their wooden legs. They struck and rendered the flesh of his legs with surprising ferocity, and when Harry collapsed to the ground, he was quickly overwhelmed. And then there was silence. You probably want a little context for everything you just experienced. Context that our unfortunate slouching Harry would have never been able to receive or understand. This is one of the lesser-known anomalies in the Foundation's vast catalog, SCP-1196, also known as CHAIRopractors. Get it? This is an anomaly localized entirely in the basement of a North American chiropractor's office, which seems to uniquely affect chairs for reasons unknown. If ever a chair is placed into this basement, it will become alive and sapient and begin moving around the basement using its legs. The chairs will move around freely regardless of if a human is in the basement, but if a human does enter the area of effect, then the chairs will begin to speak, vocalizing in squeaky, high-pitched voices. The following are examples of some of their stock phrases recorded over the course of Foundation containment.
Stand up straight. Don't slouch. Fix your posture. Slouching causes scoliosis. I said stand up straight. Straight.
Now you might think that following the commands of the chairs at this point might make everything kosher, but that is not the case. The chairs will make these comments regardless of the state of your spinal health, and if you remain in the basement, they'll become increasingly angry with time. This will first result in their tone of voice becoming more harsh and severe, before then escalating to acts of physical aggression. The chairs will start to behave like an angry pack of wolves, circling you while yelling at you about your poor posture. If you don't leave within 60 minutes of first entering, the chairs will attack, beating, tripping, stabbing, and crushing you with their legs.
It'll be a shockingly vicious onslaught for a gang of chairs, and the only way you can avoid your fate is getting out of that basement, seeing as the chairs cannot remain alive after they leave the anomalous area. If the person isn't able to escape and the massive chairs do, in fact, beat them to death, their tones will immediately change. While they will attempt to bury the body of the person they've killed, trying to use shovels to dig into the earth and failing due to a lack of fingers, they will also express remorse for their crimes. The Foundation has recorded a number of apologetic phrases they've heard from the chairs after these events have taken place, including,
We're sorry. Apologies. I'm sorry. Tried helping. Forgive?
The anomalous chairs of SCP-1196 clearly have pure intentions, even if their actions end up hurting people far more than helping them. Strangely, chiropractors themselves are actually much the same in that regard. But here's the twist. Non-anomalous chiropractors may have actually killed far more people than this anomaly ever has. Studies performed by non-anomalous research organizations have confirmed this. Chiropractic care has been mired in controversy and pseudoscience since the very beginning, born from the belief that so many of the conditions we all suffer from are all down to pressure on our spines, known as vertebral subluxation. This obviously isn't true, but even worse than this, the common chiropractic technique of cracking necks is as extremely dangerous as it sounds. Your neck is filled with a huge number of extremely delicate blood vessels, and the cracking process can damage these blood vessels, causing blood clots that can then travel up into the brain and cause a fatal stroke. Multiple people have died this way directly after seeing a chiropractor. So all things considered, we think we'd take our chances with the anomalous chairs in the basement. There's been a strange phenomenon sweeping central Germany. While the true extent of its influence is still unknown, it seems to have been going on for quite some time now, usually in irregular intervals. If you were to head down to any of the towns within the affected region for a visit, the chances of you noticing anything out of the ordinary would still be rather low. But then again, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's entirely possible you could witness an occurrence of SCP-3023, every arachnophobe's worst nightmare. One terrifying incident happened at a baseball game held during the height of the summer. With the scorching sun hanging high above a stadium packed with eager fans, the home team was neck and neck with their longtime rivals from the next town over. As the players took to the field after a changeover, everything hung in the balance. The home team's coach had made a bold change, sending out a new baseman, a young man named Jenik Denke. He was a rookie, untested, but the team's strongest veterans had been doing their best through the whole first half of the game, and still, the scores were almost tied. And so Janik stepped up to the base, unaware that making the next catch would change his life forever. The crowd was silent, the tensions flattening their cheers and chants to a low murmur as the rival's heaviest hitter stepped up to the bat. He was a behemoth, arms twice the size of the baseball bat he carried over his broad shoulder, striding up with confidence as he readied to swing. Watching and waiting, a bead of sweat rolled down Janik's forehead, dropping down the bridge of his nose. He couldn't tell which was making him sweat more, the heat of the sun or his own nerves. His teammate at the pitcher's mound lifted a leg, the baseball in hand. If he gripped the ball any tighter, his fingernails might have splintered and got lodged in the white synthetic leather wrapped around it. Janik stared, not even bothering to wipe away the drops of sweat in his eyes. As his teammate's throwing arm reeled back and hurled the ball forward, it felt like time itself had slowed down. The rival team's batter swatted the baseball out of the air with an earth-shattering crack that sent the ball speeding through the air. Janik dashed to catch it, his mitt outstretched. The ball was careening back down to earth like a white and red meteorite, almost moving fast enough to burn up on re-entry as it hurled through the atmosphere. Janik could feel his heart rattling against his ribcage as every instinct told him he'd never make that fateful catch. In a final act of desperation, he leaped off the ground with every ounce of strength, and all around him the crowd exploded with the thunderous sounds of overjoyed applause. The mighty force of the weighty cork ball was like catching a punch in midair, the tremors of the impact rippling down Janik's arm. He felt that first, before realizing that the ball was now lodged securely in his hand. He'd done it. He'd made the catch. The batter was out. But before he could even react in celebration, it happened. His arm recovered from the initial shock of the catch just in time to feel the lightning-fast flurry of small legs scuttling over his skin. Barely able to catch his breath, the last thing Janik saw was something that used to be the baseball, hurriedly crawling up his chest towards his neck. From a distance, his teammates, the fans in the audience, only saw him drop to the turf, flailing his arms trying to brush off something crawling over him as it attacked and killed the young baseman in what otherwise would have been the proudest moment of his life. While that might have been the first time anything like that had ever happened, it certainly wouldn't be the last. Now, have you ever passed by an abandoned building and felt an urge to look around inside? Of course, a lot of us have. But most of us are smart enough to resist the urge. But on the very rare times you and your friends have worked up the courage to explore somewhere like this, you've probably never found anything all that interesting. Then again, you might want to think twice before sneaking past those keep out and condemned signs. Maxie and Iva learned that lesson the hard way when they gained access to an abandoned office block. Maybe they were trying their hand at making a Blair Witch Project-style amateur found footage movie, or they could have been dabbling in some urban exploration. Best case, there might have been a few places of office furniture left behind by the building's previous occupants, something that the removal company forgot to take when the place was cleared out. The pair of them could have just helped themselves. After all, they needed a new folding chair for their apartment, and there was one just sitting there. Trembling through her stifled tears, Iva's phone was shuddering in her hand. The office had been dark, but she was certain the shadowy shape that had taken Maxie didn't belong to a human being. Clamping her hand over her mouth to silence her terrified breaths, she peered out from under the desk, pointing her phone's camera wherever she looked as it recorded. Iva could hear the loud tapping of several metal legs, moving hurriedly around the empty office. The noise would pause at irregular intervals. Every time it stopped, she thought, no, prayed that the creature was gone. But just as Iva went to look, she would hear the same sound, quick, scampering steps, the kind of movements that feel unnatural to look at, that are only possible for things with 8 legs. Perhaps that made it worse. The creature didn't shriek or scream or breathe like you'd expect of some awful monster in a horror movie. But then again, how could it? It had been a chair when Maxie had walked up to it. Nothing more than an ordinary folding chair. The patter of metal footsteps stopped again, this time for longer. It had to be gone now, she thought. She gave it another few seconds just to make sure the silence wasn't broken again. Crawling out from under the desk, her phone still in her hand, Iva allowed herself to breathe a tentative sigh, only for that sigh to become a scream as it lunged at her. The chair's seat and back, now the body and maw of an angry arachnid monster. As Iva screamed, her phone caught the whole gruesome sight on camera. You might be starting to see a pattern emerging here. But there's yet another twist in this multi-legged tale. What if these occurrences weren't just random incidents? Sure, they might fall into the freak of nature category like so many other anomalous incidents, but while it's unclear exactly how these particular anomalies come about, could it be possible that something, or someone, is creating them on purpose? Mobile Task Force Alpha 21 were already on the scene in the aftermath of the latest incursion. The Elite Foundation strike team had eliminated the threat. Luckily, it had started life as a phone, meaning they were able to remotely destroy it, causing its electronic components to detonate. Not before it had killed 2 Foundation personnel, though. Naturally, now came the cleanup operation, gathering up evidence, leaving no trace of what had happened. The SCP Foundation still had little clue as to what exactly caused instances of this nature, a phenomenon they had now designated as SCP-3023. All they had to go on was a handful of cases, and footage recovered from a cell phone that had belonged to an urban explorer who'd met an untimely end at the jaws of a folding chair. But speaking of footage, something unusual had been caught by a security camera a few days before the latest SCP-3023 incident. The security footage showed a man breaking into an office where the latest 3023 instance, the telephone, had been found. As he picked up the phone in question, this individual's jaw appeared to unnaturally split open horizontally, allowing 4 dark, tongue-like appendages to emerge. These appendages rubbed the phone for over half a minute before retracting. The man then returned the phone to its original place and promptly left the office. Thanks to further investigations conducted by the Foundation's forensic experts, this unknown individual was identified as Mr. Saar, the owner of a local restaurant. Naturally, MTF Alpha 21 moved in to apprehend this suspect, the only real lead as to what has been causing the multiple instances of SCP-3023 to begin occurring in Germany. However, when Saar was eventually detained, he showed next to no sign of any anomalies in his body. He claimed to have no memory of the events depicted in the security footage, had never encountered any previous SCP-3023 instance, and seemed to possess no knowledge of the strange properties he exhibited on camera. Nonetheless, the SCP Foundation was forced to detain Mr. Saar, although he never displayed any anomalous behavior ever again. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking that, with Saar held in Foundation custody, everyone could breathe a sigh of relief. But sadly, for any arachnophobes watching at home, new instances of SCP-3023 kept cropping up, in even stranger and more horrific fashion than ever before. Imagine you had a headache, and we're talking about a real killer here. One of those power drill to the frontal lobe migraines. Maybe you'd spend too much time glued to a computer screen at work, and all that blue light from your monitor scrambled your gray matter. Or perhaps last night was a pretty wild one, and after a few too many drinks, you were left feeling hungover the next morning. What's your go-to response in that situation? Obviously, you can call in sick to work, then go to your medicine cabinet or an over-the-counter pharmacy and grab some basic painkillers, paracetamol, aspirin, ibuprofen, all the things that we trust to make us feel better, not to make things even worse. To Patrick, this started as one of the most normal things in the world. Like you or I, his immediate response to finding himself suffering from a raging headache was to grab a gelatin capsule of ibuprofen. As casually and unsuspectingly as anyone would, he took the pill in hopes of quickly relieving his pain and carrying on with his day, probably even chasing it down with a quick glass of water. Only unbeknownst and unseen to Patrick, something happened the moment that ibuprofen capsule passed through his lips and went towards his throat. Something that stopped it from fully going down his throat, in fact. Much like the baseball, the folding chair, the phone, and who knows how many other unrecorded incidents, the pill had sprouted 8 spider-like legs. At first, it started as a gentle cough, like you'd expect when a capsule gets lodged in your throat. Grabbing a tissue, Patrick gave a few grunting attempts at clearing his airway. There was definitely something in there that almost felt like it was scratching. Not the kind of scratch at the back of the throat brought on by some allergies, the kind of scratching that caused Patrick to cough up blood when he put a tissue to his mouth, the kind of scratching that he could feel moving, crawling around his windpipe. Perhaps if he had more time, Patrick could have raced to the hospital and had whatever was clawing its way around his throat removed safely with that free European healthcare. Unfortunately, the thing that the capsule had turned into just as he swallowed it wasn't that kind. Racked with unimaginable pain, Patrick was writhing and spluttering uncontrollably, his mouth filled with more bile and blood than saliva at that point. The scratching was moving, and not down towards his esophagus towards his stomach. It was going outwards, burrowing through the insides of his neck until it reached his spinal cord. By that time, the little ibuprofen capsule-sized instance of SCP-3023 came crawling out from the back of his neck. Patrick was already dead. Let's say you were aware of this, of all these strange happenings, seemingly ordinary everyday objects turning into angry, aggressive spiders. Obviously, the Foundation might want to have a little chat with you about how you came across such information, but for the sake of argument, imagine you did know. You might think the smart idea would be to leave. After all, SCP-3023 instances are only known to occur in a specific region of central Germany, neatly situated in the middle of Leipzig and Dusseldorf. So you might think that it's time to up sticks and leave that area. Maybe even leave Germany altogether. Just hop in your car and drive to safety. If only it were that easy. A family of 4 was cruising down the Autobahn in an SUV. Just another car on the packed highway. Exhausted after hours on the road, Matteo and Nina sat quietly up front, making sure they didn't wake their son and daughter, both asleep in the rear passenger seats. The car was picking up speed, about to pass 70 miles per hour as it gradually carried them home, although it wasn't going to get them all the way back.
The screech of twisting metal woke both sleeping kids up screaming, their parents equally shocked at the sudden noise. The car lurched and buckled, like something had collided with it. But this was no ordinary traffic accident. Without any rhyme or reason, the front of their SUV warped itself into the distinctive shape of a cephalothorax, while the rear turned into what looked like an abdomen. As the car shifted and reshaped around them, the grinding of metal as auto parts became huge metal legs. Mateo, Nina, and their children were still trapped inside, never to make it out. But the creepy crawly carnage wasn't just contained inside the car. The newly born arachnid abomination hurtled its way down the Autobahn, managing to maintain its speed. Other drivers swerved and slammed on their brakes to avoid hitting the creature they couldn't even believe was scuttling hurriedly along the highway. Unfortunately, this led them to careening into other cars, smashing headfirst into a pileup that claimed the lives of 41 people. Not that the SCP Foundation would ever admit it. With one of their facilities only 250 meters away, they were quick to dispatch an airstrike to deal with the spidery SUV once it became clear that Mobile Task Force Alpha 21 couldn't contain it. Across the board, anything capable of sprouting 4 pairs of spindly legs and crawling towards you with the intent to kill tends to rack up quite the body count. But dealing with bodies are some people's business. That was the case for Lucas, a newly qualified coroner. After passing years of training, he was working with the local police department, performing autopsies and examining bodies to help them with their investigations. Sure, it may not have been the most glamorous profession, but Lucas could sleep soundly, knowing that he'd never get hurt by a dead body. A John Doe, a body that hadn't yet been identified, had just been brought in after police had found him on the side of the road. Lucas thoroughly washed his hands, put on his gloves and scrubs, along with the rest of the autopsy team. He'd sat in on at least a dozen of these procedures, studied the relevant process and techniques. Everything had prepared him for the job of figuring out how someone had died. But not even the most experienced medical examiner could be prepared for what happened next. Taking the lead, Lucas began by making the primary incision into the cadaver's chest. It always reminded him of a particular scene in The Thing, where a character's stomach opened up and became a maw of frightening teeth, revealing them to be the titular shape-shifting alien. That thought was quickly shaken away when suddenly, to Lucas's surprise, the body lurched violently on the examining table. Not everyone expects dead bodies to be able to move, and while it might be rare, it's also not impossible. Any number of things can cause someone's remains to move after death. Muscles atrophying or spasming, the body filling up with gas as it breaks down. Of course, any coroner would expect these movements to have subsided by the time someone reaches the autopsy room. Caught off guard by the sudden violent movement, Lucas stepped away, dropping his scalpel. His panting breath warmed his face beneath his surgical mask as he stared for a moment, waiting to see if the body moved again. Certain it would be still now, Lucas wrote the spooky incident off just as a muscle spasm and leaned over to retrieve his scalpel. But while he was crouching, he noticed something strange. It almost looked as if there were a pair of protrusions poking out from under the dead man's skin. Walking around the other side of the table, Lucas found 2 more similar lumps at the body's abdomen, almost as if something was inside, ready to force its way out. Without warning, the John Doe suddenly moved again on the examining table, only this time, it didn't stop. Lucas couldn't believe his eyes. The man's face was still, frozen in the same dead expression, but his arms and legs were thrashing and writhing around as if he was somehow still alive. 4 extra limbs suddenly burst from the sides of the cadaver, and the now 8-legged creature reared itself up, leaping towards a member of the autopsy team. It scuttled and skittered around on its new appendages while Lucas watched in horror. Blood-curdling screams filled the autopsy room as he bolted for the door. Lucas raced down the corridor. The coroner dared not looking behind him while sprinting through the city mortuary. Behind him, he could hear the thudding of the spider's multiple limbs right at his heels. Out of the corner of his eyes, right on the edge of his peripheral vision, he could see the massive legs scuttling towards him. Maybe he would get out, run all the way to safety before the spider was upon him. But how can you hope to outrun something with 8 legs when you only have 2? The most important thing to remember is that while any unsuspecting inanimate object near you might suddenly decide to become an angry spider, the chances of it happening are very, very low. But especially if you happen to be in central Germany, those chances are never 0 either. The Ethics Committee is one of the SCP Foundation's most important and overlooked divisions. The small, secretive group keeps a close eye on the Foundation to ensure that all decisions made and all actions taken are for the betterment of humanity, and not just in service of needless sadism and cruelty. The Ethics Committee consists of a small group of people in comparison to the gargantuan that is the Foundation as a whole. It's only natural that every so often something slips under their radar, and when it does, it usually results in complete and utter disaster. In the case of SCP-4051, that something is a male humanoid with a unique ability to open wormholes to extra-dimensional spaces. And in terms of disaster, well, let's just say we hope you have a pretty tight grip on that red SCP expert coffee mug of yours. The wormholes that SCP-4051 opens are essentially spaces filled with infinite copies of a single item, which SCP-4051 can reach in and pull out, assuming they're small enough, that is. The Foundation's strict experimentation schedule has provided a lot of important data on how SCP-4051's anomaly functions. Controlled testing showed SCP-4051 was able to manifest small, simple objects, like a net, sugar pills, or drinking water. But he's also claimed or reported to have manifested many other things, like aluminum baseball bats, duct tape, and more. At one point, SCP-4051 was allowed to use these abilities to assist with the site, but the Ethics Committee recently halted this. Seems like a simple enough anomaly, but with the Foundation, we all know it never is. So let's go back. Let's start at the very beginning. The Foundation first became aware of SCP-4051 when YouTube videos surfaced online of a vigilante in an American city using wormholes to fight criminals. The videos got over 2 million views before the Foundation became aware in August 2012 and stepped in, taking it down and investigating what had led to it. A mobile task force was dispatched to retrieve the individual using the wormholes and brought SCP-4051 back to Site-17. The first interview with SCP-4051 began on a bad note. SCP-4051 was handcuffed behind a pane of glass when Dr. Arthur Roswell began to speak to him. Dr. Roswell introduced himself and confirmed that SCP-4051's name was Rainer Miller. After being assured of his safety, SCP-4051 calmed down a little and stopped struggling with the handcuffs. At Dr. Roswell's request, SCP-4051 began to explain the details of his anomalous power. He affirmed that he could make small objects appear out of thin air, and that he tried to use these abilities to help people. At first, he'd intermittently interrupt carjackings and robberies, subduing the criminal, but with a new criminal syndicate moving in, the crime rate skyrocketed, requiring Rainer to patrol much more regularly. During these acts of heroism, several witnesses saw Rainer's powers, though he tried to keep them quiet. His request for the Foundation to intervene with the criminal situation was acknowledged, as Rainer volunteered any and all information he had, stating that he just wanted to help the Foundation. Roswell thanked him for his enthusiasm. It didn't take long for the Foundation to move to experimenting with Rainer's powers, as the Foundation often does. At first they started slow. Dr. Roswell and his colleague, Dr. Edwards, asked Rainer to manifest a few small items, a metal cube, a bottle of bleach, and something of his choice. He was able to produce the cube without any trouble, and the object of his choice wound up being a framed picture of his mother. When he tried to take the bleach out, he seemed upset, but managed to do it. With the experiment a success, SCP-4051 was escorted back to his containment chamber. All the way there, he repeatedly asked how long this testing phase would take before he would be let go. The staff didn't have an answer for him. In the next test, Rainer was asked by Roswell and Edwards to produce a copy of War and Peace and a phone. Both were produced, but the book was filled with gibberish and the phone was entirely hollow. The researchers concluded that the anomaly is based on how well SCP-4051 understands the object being manifested, and mused about requesting something that didn't exist. Rainer still asked all the researchers how his family was, and whether he would have any friends at the Foundation between tests. The questions were, once again, ignored by the staff. In the third experiment, Roswell and Edwards asked Rainer to produce objects that didn't exist, a circular square, a color, and so on. But SCP-4051 wanted to know about his family and when he would be able to go home before he would try to manifest anything. Roswell assured him that once the Foundation had a solid grip on his ability, he would be allowed to go home. Questions about his family revealed that his mother believed he was away visiting colleges. He demanded to speak to his mother before any other experiments, and Roswell affirmed that he'd asked the O5s for approval when the experiment in question was finished. Rayner agreed and began the experiment, trying to produce the impossible items. What came out were cognitohazards, severely damaging the mental state of anyone trying to perceive them. Half the research team instantly collapsed, and security guards subdued Rayner to take him back to his cell. The testing chamber was cleaned, and Dr. Edwards wrote that the value of SCP-4051's anomaly was too great to let him sit in a box unused. He called for a special pediatric therapist and authorized further experiments on Rayner. But in his own containment cell, Rayner was still knocked out after the test had gone wrong. The cameras watched on as he woke up and began curling up and away from them toward the other side of the room, then standing up a few minutes later. He had manifested many small pieces of body armor and glued them to his body. The guards were distracted with escorting Roswell and Edwards from the testing chamber and didn't realize anything was wrong until Rayner manifested a small bomb and blew his door open, leaving his cell. Other security guards immediately turned and responded, trying to subdue SCP-4051 with non-lethal weapons. Eventually, a few were able to overpower and incapacitate Rayner and move him back to his cell. The day after the containment breach, Site-17's director Thomas Graham sent out an open letter to all staff assigned to SCP-4051. Rayner had been moved to a more secure containment unit, but everyone agrees that it would be better in the long run if SCP-4051 is working for the Foundation rather than against it, especially with regards to amnestics. Sourcing Y909, a chemical used in amnestics, was dangerous and expensive for the Foundation. But if Rayner's abilities could be harnessed to produce amnestics easily, then he would be all the more valuable to them as a friend rather than a foe. The Ethics Committee also required that SCP-4051 do so voluntarily for the Foundation, rather than being forced to produce amnestics against his will. To that, Dr. Edwards was promoted to SCP-4051's project director, on the basis that he would try to ensure Rayner would be totally and utterly loyal to the Foundation, using whatever means necessary. He already set up a schedule, using punishments and rewards, along with regular checkups from an on-site therapist. The therapy sessions began on a good note. Dr. Yesenia, the therapist assigned to SCP-4051, introduced herself politely, and Rayner seemed to take a shine to her. They discussed his unique anomaly and the containment breach incident. Yesenia was kind and understood the psychological toll containment had on people. She asked why he wanted to escape, and he explained he just wanted to see his family. He was close with his mother since his father had walked down on them when Rayner was just a boy. They had been supporting each other since, and he missed her a lot. That said, he explained he wasn't opposed to living at the Foundation. They could help him actually understand his powers, and he didn't mind being a part of tests if he knew he was helping people. He just wanted to see his family again. Yesenia's after-meeting notes said that the containment effort should be focused on assuring Rayner that the Foundation had his best interests in mind. The next set of experiments were a little more abstract. Dr. Edwards alone was overseeing them, and the first experiment included another individual, a D-Class. The plan was to see if the D-Class could also pull things out of the portals, or if only SCP-4051 was able to interact with his portals. The D-Class was scared of Rayner, but after some urging by Dr. Edwards, he managed to touch the sides of the portals and reach in and pull out a stone. Rayner was only anomalous in his ability to manifest the portals, so Edwards' plan was to cut out the middleman and to perform research on SCP-4051's brain to see if they could successfully devise an artificial method of creating the portals. The experiment after that was to see the bounds and geographies of the pocket dimensions that Rayner generated. A GPS tracking chip was thrown into one of the portals SCP-4051 made, specifically the portal leading to portraits of his mother. The portal shut. Then Rayner was asked to recreate it. The researchers checked to see if they could still get a solid signal from the tracking chip, and they did, albeit almost 1,000 kilometers away. The results were filed away, but Edwards noticed one thing. The portrait of SCP-4051's mother was slightly different. It seemed that he was forgetting what she looked like. The next therapy appointment with Dr. Yesenia covered how Rayner felt about that experiment. He was excited that they were actually performing research about the anomaly that he wasn't capable of just telling them, that they were now finding out something interesting about his powers. Yesenia asked if he had any requests for tests. but he doubted that Edwards would listen to anything he said. The doctor seemed to dislike Rayner for some reason he couldn't figure out, but he knew best on what to test and how. Meanwhile, Edwards had come up with something that could utilize SCP-4051's abilities in a useful way for the project of synthesizing amnestics, Procedure 350 Promethean. The details of this clandestine project are murky and secretive, but the goal was to see if they could use Rayner as a live method of synthesizing Y909 through an experimental surgical procedure. Several contingencies were planned. If the wormhole became too dangerous or Rayner tried to resist, he'd be automatically injected with paralytics and sent back to his cell. The project wasn't immediately approved, though. The ethics committee sent one of their most skilled liaisons, Jeremiah Cimmerian, to conduct the approval process. He interviewed Dr. Edwards, ascertaining that the man was sane and able to conduct the procedure, that any unethical actions that were outside of the scope of the proposal would result in his removal from the team and disciplinary action. Moreover, he revealed that he knew that Dr. Roswell, SCP-4051's original researcher, was Edwards' brother, and that he had been permanently injured in the incident when Rayner was asked to manifest impossible objects. Edwards swore that he wouldn't take any needless actions to cause intentional pain and suffering, and that everything he would do would be in service of the Foundation's goals. With that, Procedure 350 Promethean was approved. Meanwhile, Dr. Roswell's condition wasn't improving. He had been put into an induced coma by medical personnel due to his extensive exposure to the cognitohazards. He wasn't expected to recover anytime soon. After the ethics committee approved the procedure, Dr. Edwards stopped conducting usual experiments. The very next test involving SCP-4051 was the first implementation of Procedure 350 Promethean, but it failed. Rayner broke the restraints on the chair during the painful procedure, and Edwards considered tranquilizing him, but decided against it. "We need it awake," he said. The next therapy session, though, Rayner didn't so much as mention the procedure. Instead, he greeted Dr. Yesenia, explaining that he wasn't doing so well. He had talked back to a guard, and they had taken his desk away as punishment, and he felt like it was his own fault. Dr. Yesenia was worried and offered to see if she could get the desk back, but he declined the offer, saying he'd just try to be better. After this session, Yesenia felt annoyed, not by Rayner, but by Edwards. He had been saying that the subject was getting resentful and rude, but Rayner still seemed like a sweet, helpful child. The next time Procedure 350 Promethean was enacted, it was the first time Edwards actually managed to successfully complete it. SCP-4051 was actually being compliant with the procedure, making the job a lot easier for the surgical staff. The results and details of it, however, were still unclear. In the therapy session after that, Rayner told Dr. Yesenia that he had been having terrible dreams every night, nightmares that stopped him from sleeping. He worried that people would treat him like a freak, not because of his anomaly, but because of what happened with his father. Dr. Yesenia encouraged him to tell her. She already knew, but felt it would be good if he let it out, and he shared his memory of how his father had locked him in a closet and abused him, burning him with bleach. That's why he'd been upset when asked to take a bottle of bleach in the first test. His nightmares were about not being able to escape something that was coming toward him, and that his father could still be out there. But Yesenia admitted to him that while she shouldn't be telling him, his father had been found by the Foundation. He was serving a life sentence in an Arkansas prison for murder. Rayner grew quiet for a moment before changing the subject. Yesenia's observations were optimistic, and she believed his mental health was improving and that he was now fitting into his role at the Foundation, though she wondered how Edwards' experiments with him were going. The next implementation of Procedure 350 Promethean went poorly. Edwards wrote in his diary angrily afterwards that Rayner didn't even remember Roswell or recognize his name. How he was angry that he was assigned to the anomaly that had nearly killed his brother. He had an outburst during the experiment, and it was shut down early. But only a week after, another attempt was made. While the procedure was being done, Rayner asked about Roswell, but was cut off. The research team knew that if he was told what he had done to Dr. Roswell, his mental health would crater and negatively affect the project. In spite of that, the procedure was a success, and Edwards took credit for the whole thing. They were getting closer to being able to completely make use of SCP-4051's anomaly.
In his next therapy session, Raynor recounted how he liked being out and about in nature and how the containment cell had become a suffocating prison. Yesenia suggested she might be able to swing a treadmill in his room to keep him active if she bothered her superiors, but he didn't want her to get in trouble. He seemed worried and upset. He voiced that he didn't think these experiments were helping people anymore, that he was being a burden. Yesenia had an idea. She could ask the director to allow Raynor to help out around the site, fixing little things and helping clean things up. It wasn't much, but it would allow him some activity and boost his morale about helping people, all while making use of his anomaly. Raynor was excited. He loved the idea and had been scared about being stuck in a cell uselessly. After the session, Yesenia reflected that it seemed cruel to manipulate SCP-4051 into wanting to help the Foundation when he so obviously already wants to help. And just like she said, it didn't take long for the director to authorize a security clearance for SCP-4051, just enough to be outside his cell when accompanied, to help with site maintenance. While Raynor was off fixing things around the site, Yesenia decided to do some digging and asked for information about the experiments Edwards was conducting, but didn't have a high enough clearance. Meanwhile, Edwards had come up with a prototype for a machine that can mimic SCP-4051's abilities. A few weeks after it was approved, Site-17 had a minor containment breach, and a few hostile anomalies overran armed personnel. Raynor was present at the time and used his wormholes to terminate the anomalies before containment was re-established. Even though he saved lives, Yesenia was forced to reprimand him for using his powers without authorization, and he was banned from any maintenance for 2 months. Several months later, the machine to mimic Raynor's powers, 350 Janus, isn't working correctly and keeps producing the wrong object. Yesenia keeps requesting information on Edwards' experiments, but is denied every time, even when she asks the ethics committee for a review on the project. The machine worked, but only once, breaking right after. SCP-4051's story is a strange one. It involved an MTF mission sent into a dangerous area to contain an object, with Raynor sent along with them. The full mission log has yet to be declassified, and maybe we'll cover it in a future video. But for now, let's just say something went wrong during that mission. The Foundation discovered something new and dangerous about SCP-4051's powers, and a closer eye fell upon the project. The Ethics Committee reevaluated what had gone on with SCP-4051, and the site director surrendered information that Edwards' experiments hadn't been all in the name of science, that he might have been needlessly cruel and violent to an innocent anomaly, just because he wanted revenge for the accidental mutilation of his brother. After taking a closer look, the Ethics Committee came to the decision that SCP-4051 needed to be rethought. Large portions of the document were redacted and classified, and they tried to bury the project. SCP-4051's powers were too dangerous to allow about the site. His permissions were revoked, and he was placed into permanent containment in a more specialized cell. The researchers of the Foundation need oversight. Otherwise, you get incidents like SCP-4051, where a vengeful doctor subjected an otherwise innocent being to brutal surgical experiments and manipulation under the guise of research. It goes to show that the Foundation isn't always the good guy. In fact, from the perspective of the anomalies, the Foundation can be pretty damn evil. Now, alarms blare around the jewelry store. The 3 robbers, decked out in balaclavas and wielding handguns, start to panic. One raises his gun and fires off a shot, hoping to bring down the emotional temperature in the store. But it does something much worse. It hits the cashier in the chest. He clutches his bleeding heart and collapses against one of the display cases. It's gone too far. They need to bail before it gets any uglier. Little do they know, ugliness is on its way towards them. One of them opens fire and blows out the glass door for a quick escape. They can already hear the sirens getting closer, but maybe if they get to the getaway car in time, they can make a clean break. But before they can reach the car, a strawberry hits the leader of the 3 robbers in the face. He pauses for a moment, baffled, and then turns to see a stern, solemn figure standing 10 feet away from them, decked out in a gray suit, and leveling the ultimate 1970s hand cannon, the .44 Magnum. It is the one and only Dirty Harry Callahan, the cowboy cop who asks no questions and takes no prisoners. Smoke is rising from the gun's barrel, as though a shot has just been fired. But did a strawberry come out of that gun? There's no time to think. The three scramble in different directions, but Harry's aim is true. He turns the magnum to robber number 1 and fires. A burst of electricity, like a crack of lightning, comes blasting out of the barrel of the weapon and zaps him so hard that for a brief moment you can see his glowing skeleton. He falls to the ground stunned, with smoke coming out of him. Harry calmly thinks, 1 down, 2 to go. Robber number 2 is scrambling to the getaway vehicle, hoping that perhaps he can still salvage the escape attempt. But Harry aims on him, and it's all over. He squeezes the trigger of his magnum, and out of the barrel of the gun comes a concentrated jet of boiling hot coffee, squirting right into the robber's face. He screams in pain and falls to the floor, clutching his scalding face. Only one robber remains running for his life when Harry aims the gun and fires. An angry cat flies out of the barrel and lands on robber number 1, disabling him in a flurry of screeching and scratching. The robber falls to the ground and Harry approaches, aiming the magnum down at him. He growls his iconic line, "I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5? Well, to tell you the truth, in all this excitement I kind of lost track myself. But being as this is a .44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world and would blow your head clean off, you gotta ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?" He squeezes the trigger, and an entire grand piano fires out, crushing the robber. To any movie buffs out there, you've probably already gathered that this scene does not take place in the 1971 Clint Eastwood neo-noir Dirty Harry. But it could have, if Harry's iconic .44 Magnum was loaded with SCP-8098, a collection of anomalous bullets that caused the SCP Foundation far much more trouble than you ever would have imagined. It all started in an abandoned farmstead in Kansas, raided by the Foundation after several reports of strange, anomalous activity. They discovered a number of anomalies inside the main barn, in addition to a large stockpile of weapons. Most pertinent among them is a pair of .44 Magnum revolvers, and a small cardboard box full of .44 Magnum rounds labeled with the brand Morphic Munitions, along with slogans like, "Try to collect them all," and "So many different flavors to collect." This immediately raised flags just on the level of common sense. Who's flavoring bullets? This warranted further explanation, and along with the rest of the anomalous objects, the Morphic Munitions were taken back to Site 18 for further study, where they were designated SCP-8098. Little did the researchers know, things were about to get incredibly strange, even by the standards of the SCP Foundation. The research on SCP-8098 was conducted primarily by Dr. Velez and Dr. Eliza, and they soon learned 2 important facts: that each of the different flavored bullets had a different anomalous effect when fired, and that these anomalous effects only took place when fired out of a .44 Magnum. But let's not beat around the bush here, folks. We know why you're here. You want to know all about the freaky flavors and their different anomalous effects. Don't worry, we'll tell you exactly what Dr. Velez and Dr. Eliza found in a freaky flavor lightning round. In the first test, they tried the strawberry-flavored bullet. As you probably predicted, it caused a single non-anomalous strawberry to fire out of the gun's barrel, splattering against the wall. Harmless, but delicious. In the second test, they tried the coffee-flavored bullet. This time it fired out a concentrated jet of hot coffee that maintained water pressure for 25 seconds before running out of steam, enough to fill about 2.5 coffee mugs. This coffee also proved to be non-anomalous. In the third test, they loaded the electricity-flavored bullet and fired it at a small metal spoon to test its conductive properties. This didn't go quite as smoothly as the researchers hoped, as the electricity zapped around the room and interfered with electronic equipment, leading to the test being suspended. Afterwards, when the round was removed from the cylinder, it was notably smaller than when it was first loaded. The fourth test was even stranger. The bullet entered into the Magnum was claimed to be cat-flavored, and it lived up to expectations, firing a 3-year-old American short-hair cat that proved to be completely non-anomalous in and of itself. For the cat lovers in our audience, don't worry. The cat was safely rehomed after the test. In the fifth test, the bullet was labeled Entropy. When the gun was fired, nothing happened, but when the researchers checked the cylinder, the bullet was gone. In the sixth test, the bullet was flavored Anger. It was also the first time a test was conducted on a D-class subject, who upon having the bullet fired at him was physically unharmed, but entered a prolonged state of rage,
shouting profanities and refusing to comply with any of the researchers' commands for an hour. The 7th test involved a recycling-flavored bullet fired at a plastic water bottle. This resulted in both the transmutation of the bottle and the table. The bottle recycled itself into a small Tupperware container, and the table became 2 large blocks, one of solid plastic and the other of solid metal. This brings us to test number 8, the fascinating teleportation-flavored bullet. This one fired a ball of purple light that, upon making contact with the wall, teleported the firer, along with all of their clothes and personal effects, to the area where the ball of light had come into contact with. These previously inconsequential tests started to take a turn for the disastrous during test number 9, when the black hole-flavored Magnum round was tested. This would also, incidentally, be the only time the black hole-flavored ammo was tested, as the data for this test was expunged and all black hole-flavored rounds were moved to another site. This left only a collection of rounds ominously marked mystery flavor, which had a whole host of strange and often freaky effects. These include firing a blow pop brand lollipop that exploded and shattered against the wall when fired, but seemed otherwise non-anomalous, a grand piano that somehow fired out of the barrel before smashing against the ground, causing substantial damage, a small flame like that of a lighter which fired out of the barrel of the Magnum and remained in operation for 28 seconds before going out, and even a copy of SCP-2081, an 82-page hardback book entitled Making Your Dreams Your Reality: Lucidity for Beginners. Interestingly, after the most recent test, a copy of SCP-2081 was reported missing from containment. This suggested a vital piece of information. SCP-8098 ammo doesn't create any of the items it fires, it just takes them from other places around the world. While this seemed like just an incidental fact at first, it would soon have dire consequences for the researchers at Site-18. It started with a researcher who misplaced a key in the containment locker near all the SCP-8098 instances. When he went searching for the key, he instead found one of the anomalous bullets labeled key-flavored. This was only the start of a concerning trend. Next, when Dr. Enya found that her favorite coffee mug was missing, she found a coffee mug-flavored bullet in the Site-18 break room. When a sink went missing in a Site-18 bathroom, sure enough, they found a sink-flavored bullet. In a D-Class's temporary holding cell, they found a human-flavored bullet, and the D-Class in question was missing, save for his abandoned clothes. A mystery bullet even appeared in the holding cell of SCP-2182, an anomalous staff that would absolutely get us demonetized if we tried to describe it. This new apparent secondary anomalous quality to SCP-8098 sparked serious concern in the lead researchers on the case. A letter sent from Dr. Eliza to Dr. Velez read, "I'm getting increasingly concerned with the recent developments regarding SCP-8098. With what we have observed, it appears that random objects and people within Site-18 are being turned into new SCP-8098 instances, with no currently discovered means to revert to their previous states. I know that you and many others are already partially aware of this, but I'm surprised at the lack of attention that this has been receiving. For all we know, a researcher or an important anomaly within the facility could be next. I theorize that the cause of these effects may be due to the high concentration of SCP-8098 within its dedicated locker room in Site-18. The reason I believe this is due to the fact that after the first new instance of SCP-8098 was discovered in that locker, more and more have been appearing throughout the facility. Oh, and also, its object class should probably be changed from Safe to Euclid. It was undeniable that Dr. Eliza had a point. The object class was changed, and the ammo instances were separated across the facility to test whether Eliza's theory held water. However, from that point, more items around Site-18 began getting transmuted into SCP-8098 bullets, proving Eliza's separation theory to be correct. Things got even more peculiar when a confetti-flavored bullet appeared in a Site-18 locker room, despite there being no confetti previously in that room. Weirder still, there was a mysterious note packaged with the bullet. It read, "Yay, yay, yay! Congratulations! You are the first person to collect 30 different flavors of Morphic munitions! To celebrate this wondrous occasion, here is a unique, rare, one-of-a-kind flavor of Morphic munitions for you to sink your teeth into. Or, to put into a gun, I guess. which is okay. We don't care how you use your Morphic Munitions. The point is, you're the first one to collect 30 unique Morphic Munitions flavors, and we wanted to celebrate that. It wasn't easy to make this one, I'll tell you that. There was no confetti for miles around here, but that's okay. You deserve it, you amazing little collector, you. Anywho, keep your eye out for new waves of Morphic Munitions in your area. In response to this, the researchers tried Plan B to see if it would elicit a different response, splitting up the anomalous bullets and sending them to different facilities. Not long after this, a bullet labeled Confusion Flavor appeared in Site 18 with another attached note. This one read, Hey, it's me again. I noticed that it seems you gave a lot of your Morphic Munitions away. Was this intentional by any chance? Regardless, you are, you are both the first ones to collect 30 unique Morphic Munitions flavors, so, yeah. I was just under the impression that you guys like collecting Morphic Munitions, so I kept making more for you all. Now I'm sorta starting to doubt that. Oh, actually, you know what? I know why you did all that. You wanted to start a new, fresh collection of Morphic Munitions. Yeah! Oh, you guys are so very, very kind. I'll be sure to increase the amount of Morphic Munitions you all are able to find for being such nice collectors. Yeah. Oh yes, be sure to collect all these new awesome, unique Morphic Munitions flavors. Clearly more drastic measures were needed. Authorization was given to start destroying new instances of anomalous bullets, starting with the strawberry bullet. When the Foundation attempted to melt it down in a furnace, it exploded, releasing 10,000 strawberries in all directions and causing minor injuries to surrounding personnel. Not long after this, a new note was discovered. It read, Yes, please do not destroy any of the bullets inside of any Morphic Munitions containers. Bad effects. Bad. You can use them in a gun, fine, whatever, but do not break open any of the bullets. Please! No! Please! The rest of the page beyond this point is filled with the word bad repeated over and over. Dr. Eliza and Dr. Velez racked their brains on how to deal with this increasingly bizarre set of circumstances, as their attempts to communicate with the mysterious entity leaving the notes all fell flat. During the middle of one of their more heated arguments, one more note appeared behind them. It read, Okay, fine, I get it. I get the hint. You guys don't want any more Morphic Munitions, is that right? I'm sorry, I haven't been able to do this in so long. It felt good to see someone take interest in what I was making again. But I suppose I just can't force someone to like what I create. I'm sorry for turning all those things into Morphic Munitions. If I could turn them back, I would, but I don't know how. I hope that you can accept my apology. I didn't want it to get so out of hand, but it seems like it has. I'll be around still, but I promise to no longer hurt anyone. I promise. If I do hurt anyone else in the future, then I'll feel very bad about it. I promise. But yeah, I'm sorry about everything that's happened. I hope you all don't hate me, but I understand if you do. Anyways, goodbye. There was never another Morphic Munition bullet discovered again after that. And personally, we think the world is a darker place for their absence.
The young girl stood silently in a room full of corpses, staring off into the distance. She was in a trance, seemingly unaware of the carnage that had just unfolded around her. Some of the men were shot or stabbed or beaten. Others had no apparent cause of death whatsoever, but the young girl was unscathed. She was wearing a yellow summer dress and looked like she couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She awoke from her trance, still paying no heed to the violence in the room, and left. This is the story of SCP-053, the young girl. Her strange and terrifying life before containment, her thrilling capture, and the part she played in one of the most dangerous SCP Foundation cross-tests of all time. She had no name. The young girl could never spend enough time around someone to be given one. It was her terrible curse that she could never stay in one place for too long, or something truly awful would happen to everyone around her. She'd been drifting for years, but never grew to look older than a child. Her memories were long but formless, divided mostly into 10-minute increments. The young girl kept on moving. It was all she could do. In 1993, when the young girl had already been alive for a very long time, she found herself in Illinois after days of trekking on the roadside.
She would scavenge what little food she needed from the trash and drink from lakes, rivers, or even puddles when she needed to. Deep down, the young girl knew that if she ever grew hungry or thirsty, she would not die. In her travels, the young girl had managed to scrounge together a few dollars, and though she knew her contact with people had to be limited, there was one thing she wanted that felt worth the risk: a candy bar. It'd been a long time since she tasted chocolate, and she found the idea of tasting it again too enticing to resist. When she reached Chicago, she entered a small corner store with her handful of dollars, selected a candy bar from the rack, and approached the counter. For reasons even she didn't fully understand, she kept her eyes down as she placed the money on the counter. You see, SCP-053 was always a special child. As we briefly mentioned earlier, you might even say she was cursed. Whenever she was around other people for too long, terrible things tended to happen. Unspeakable things. And as a component of this strange, unexplainable curse, or perhaps as a means of keeping her safe from it, the young girl was doomed to never understand the nature of her predicament. It was like there was a mental wall between her and the horrors her presence could cause. All she knew was that it was best to avoid eye contact, stay away from large groups of people at all costs, and never spend any longer than 10 minutes around anyone, ever. That's why, as she waited for her chocolate bar at the cash register, she kept her head down and waited to go. The cashier looked upon this strange girl with apparent concern. It'd been a slow day, all in all. A few listless patrons milled around the store, window shopping. His brain was practically on autopilot until he saw this child. She looked filthy, in a disheveled dress, and was totally alone. What on earth had happened to this child? The more he looked at her, the more he sensed a creepy vibe exuding from her. Something about this girl was wrong. He spoke softly to her, introducing himself as Miles, and asking her where her mommy and daddy were. The young girl hesitated for just a few seconds too long for his liking, before simply saying that they were at home. Any parent who'd let their 3-year-old kid just wander around the south side of Chicago alone was either crazy, neglectful, or both. He asked her politely to remain in the store while he gave the police a quick call. He'd even let her have the candy bar for free while she waited. Immediately, the little girl became uncomfortable. She had already been in here for a few minutes now, and while Miles called the police, he expected her to wait around even longer. Again, she couldn't even tell you why she knew waiting around like this would be so dangerous, but she had a nagging, instinctual awareness that she needed to get out. Around the store, the few patrons still inside started to get a strange feeling, like someone was watching them. Soon, what seemed like mild paranoia was quickly becoming white-hot anger. Pure rage. They felt almost like they had to kill someone, but not just anyone. Someone particular. They had to kill the little girl. It wasn't long until the police arrived. 2 officers, Holiday and DeWitt, entered to collect the apparently neglected little girl. It was a story they'd sadly heard all too often, a tragically common occurrence in the big city. When the 2 of them approached the young girl, she was looking down at the ground. They tried to speak to her, but she was unresponsive. Miles looked on, concerned, but deep down, he felt the same bizarre progression all the other storegoers were feeling: confusion, irritability, and finally, violent rage. The corner store was a powder keg. All it needed now was a spark. And that spark came when Officer Holiday reached down and took the young girl by the arm. His bare skin touched hers, and it was all over. The cop twitched. His mind washed out in murderous insanity as he reached for his sidearm. Officer DeWitt opened his mouth to protest, but he didn't manage to get a syllable out before Holiday turned and shot him. In a fraction of a second, the quiet corner store exploded into a violent bloodbath as the patrons and cops slaughtered each other. All the while, the young girl just stood there in a trance. Everyone was dead within minutes, except Miles and the young girl. He shakily rose to his feet, his mind carved out by madness, and reached for Officer Holiday's discarded pistol. Outside of the store, the young girl appeared, walking out as if nothing had happened. Inside, Miles's body was sprawled over the counter, clutching his chest as if his heart had just exploded. This was the true nature of the young girl's curse. Anyone who meets her eye, touches her skin, or spends over 10 minutes around her is destined to slip into a state of murderous insanity. They'll go into a kill-crazy frenzy and attack anyone around them until all that is left is them and the young girl. At which point they'll try to kill her too, but the mere act of attempting to kill her is also fatal, killing its victims with a massive heart attack or a seizure. The second part of the girl's curse is that she herself can never die. She keeps coming back, unknowingly causing more misery and death along the way. Until, of course, a certain secret organization took notice. That night, the young girl sat in the cavernous interior of a local abandoned warehouse, quietly eating her hard-earned candy bar. Suddenly, she heard a quiet crack in the distance. She tried to move her left arm, but found it was numb. She could barely move it. The girl turned her head and saw a tranquilizer dart sticking out of her skin. Instinctively, she got up and began to run, limping as her left leg started to lose all feeling too. Suddenly, she was surrounded by footsteps as masked men in SWAT uniforms emerged out of the darkness on all sides. The last thing she remembered before slipping out of consciousness was a blindfold being pulled over her eyes and tiny metal handcuffs clasping over her wrists. When she woke up, she was in the nicest room she had slept in years. It was 16 feet by 16 feet, with toys, books, and games. Standing across the room from her was a stranger in a full hazmat suit, connected to a long steel cable leading out of the room. He spoke calmly and politely. A timer on his wrist counted down from 10 minutes. The stranger explained to the young girl that they would be taking care of her now, and would provide her with all the toys and games and treats she wanted, provided she cooperated and submitted willingly to some tests. Compared to living out on the streets with no food or comfort, this seemed like an excellent compromise. She would live in what seemed like luxury, and every so often, she'd be taken to a testing room with a stranger in an orange jumpsuit. After a few minutes of waiting, the stranger would inevitably go feral and attempt to kill her, and then always die in the process. The strangers in the hazmat suits told her that all of these tests were helping them learn extremely valuable things about her, and that soon they'd have a very special job for her. It would be a wonderful surprise. It was the spring of 1994 that the young girl, now officially designated SCP-053, finally received her special mission. Several strangers in full hazmat suits wielding rifles escorted her out of her usual bedroom. She asked where she was being taken and was told she was going to meet a new friend. She was taken to one of the recreational testing rooms and pushed inside. Out in front of her, she saw something terrifying. A giant reptilian creature. She retreated from it instinctually, hiding behind a chair in the containment area. The giant reptile didn't move. It just sat there. Eventually, she plucked up the courage to go and touch the creature before retreating again. No reaction. Little by little, the young girl gained confidence and continued to approach and pat the creature. It exhaled through its huge nostrils, and the young girl literally jumped for joy in her amusement. She began to play with the docile monster, hugging it, even drawing on it with a crayon. The observers were truly baffled. What the young girl didn't know was that she was playing with SCP-682, one of the most hateful and aggressive anomalies under the Foundation's watchful eye. And yet, in her presence, the creature was like an overgrown puppy dog. After the test phase, the young girl was removed from the hard-to-kill reptile's presence, immediately causing the creature to become violent and murderous once again. After being separated from her strange new friend, the young girl was seen crying for several minutes. According to all accounts, the young girl is eager to see her friend again someday, though considering the reptile killed several guards after their separation, the Foundation isn't eager to grant her that wish. SCP-053 was classified as Euclid and continues to be held in containment, with her toys, books, and games rotated out on a regular basis. Seeing as she shows no sign of aging, this ongoing containment is likely to be the sad, strange fate of the young girl, an anomaly that never wanted to hurt anyone,
but an important and cruel reminder that what we want doesn't always influence the world in the way we want. Telling stories was one of the few ways the crew could pass time out in space. The timeless passage of hours that seemed more like everything was standing still instead of moving. Being this far away from home meant there was no sun traveling on its daily, gradual arc overhead, nothing to remind everyone that the world was still moving, that time was still passing. Outside the windows of the research station was the endless expanse of space, stars over an inky void that stretched infinitely outwards in every direction. Well, almost every direction. It was the station's chief engineer, C. Graham's turn to share a tale with the research crew aboard Observatory Site 13 as they orbited Mercury. The other three were hardly listening with rapt attention, but if it came down to a choice between focusing on Graham's words or thinking about the huge, terrifying spatial phenomenon outside the hull of the station, the others were glad to hear what he had to say. Anything to avoid looking out at the portholes at X0620. Perhaps out of nostalgia for being back on Earth, Graham started recalling a story about a woman named Martha, someone he had lived with along with a group of fellow personnel in accommodation near one of the Foundation's containment facilities. A house share, one building containing smaller apartments, everyone living on top of each other. According to the chief engineer, Martha was something of an oblivious roommate. She would often forget to lock the front door of the apartment before she left for blackjack evenings with her friends. On one occasion, Chief Engineer Graham came home to discover that Martha had left the gas stove on in the apartment, which could have burned the entire residential section of their building down if it had gone unnoticed. So, as Graham told the rest of the crew, one could only imagine his irritation to return home one day after a long day's work at the Foundation to find the front door left wide open. All the lights in the house were switched off, and the car had been left stationary in the driveway. From this, Graham figured that Martha must have hitched a ride to work with Carol, another of hers and Graham's colleagues at the Foundation. On her way out, Martha must have forgotten to shut the front door, or if it hadn't been closed properly and the wind had caused it to open. Walking up to the open door, Graham saw nothing inside but pitch darkness. But as he stepped over the threshold and into the house, he quickly learned the place wasn't as empty as it first seemed. Martha stepped down the staircase towards Graham, immediately greeted by questions from her housemate about if she'd forgotten to shut the door properly before leaving with Carol or heading off to play cards. But Martha looked back at him, horror on her face. She hadn't been out all day, she told Graham. Carol had called in sick, so there was nobody to hitch a ride from. Then she added worryingly, "I thought I told you a minute ago when I heard you opening the door from upstairs." A second later, both Graham and Martha had jumped into their car, speeding away from the house and whoever else had managed to get inside. Neither one of them slept well when they arrived at Carol's. Later, the police were called to come and investigate. They found no signs of forced entry. Even then, the two housemates didn't want to take any chances and made requests to be moved to new Foundation-provided housing. That was partially how Graham had ended up aboard the OS-13. Martha, still back on Earth, had been saying ever since that she found herself less afraid of the thousands of anomalies contained within the walls of the Foundation, nearly all of which could kill her. What scared her more was whatever was lurking on the other side of the unknown. It had been December the 22nd of 2019 when Graham recounted this unnerving tale aboard the SCP Foundation's Observatory Site 13. The exact same day, moments after he'd told the rest of the crew about Martha and the ominously open door, instruments aboard the station observed a slight change in X0620. The gravitational lensing across its event horizon had increased by a factor of 5. So much so that the light around it started cycling around the aperture of X0620 at a spin rate of 0.92. That also happens to be the same speed at which, according to Albert Einstein, causes the distortion of space itself. The change was recorded by OS-13, but went relatively unnoticed by the rest of the crew. However, 3 days later, airlocks 1 through 3 of the station suddenly depressurized. Without any warning, the 3 hatches leading out into the cold vacuum of space flung open and threw the inside of the station into chaos as the crew's oxygen began escaping. Fortunately, by acting quickly, Chief Engineer Graham was able to reseal the airlocks successfully,
and prevent any further catastrophe. No injuries were reported by the crew, and the chief engineer attributed the mechanical malfunction to an issue with OS-13's onboard computer. It was behaving as if afflicted with a virus of some kind, but it was unclear how or when this malicious code had breached the computer. February the 9th of the following year, and the storytelling baton was passed to Jay Hart, OS-13's scope specialist. She posed an all too familiar and all too unnerving question to the rest of the crew, asking if they'd ever experienced the feeling of being watched. Hart then went on to describe a time when she and her golden retriever, Stacy, had been living out in Nebraska, about an hour's drive from Whitman. In other words, the middle of nowhere. And this was before Hart was assigned to a research station in deep space. She recalled how Stacy would often bark at strange hours of the night towards certain areas of the woods that were directly outside one of the windows of Hart's Nebraska homestead. At first, she just attributed it to local wildlife bothering or exciting her dog, like raccoons digging through the trash, even shadows that were playing tricks on Stacy's eyes as she got older. Even on the few times she went to check for herself, Hart never saw anything out there, apart from shadows and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. It made it all the easier to assume her dog was just barking at nothing. As the nights went on, Stacy's barking became more frequent and more energetic, loud enough to keep Hart up when she would try to sleep. So one evening, she decided to install security cameras around the perimeter of the house to figure out exactly what was going on. The cameras were smaller versions of the kinds installed aboard the OS-13, capable of detecting nearly anything across the electromagnetic spectrum. With this new home security system in place, Hart settled in for the night and braced herself for Stacy to start barking again. Sure enough, around the usual time, the retriever started up again. Only this time, Hart could hear Stacy whimpering in the living room. She heard the dog scratching at the underside of the bedroom door, startling Hart at first, only to open the door and discover Stacy on the other side, eager to get in bed and be with her owner. The dog rushed in and hopped into Hart's bed, as if she was afraid to be left alone with whatever was out there. The pair spent the rest of the night curled up together under the sheets, Hart and her keeping each other calm. The next morning, Hart checked the footage from the cameras, checking the time code where Stacy started barking. At that moment, one of the cameras seemed to have picked up on something just beyond the tree line, the silhouette of a figure. It was standing deathly still, arms rigidly by its side and its face obscured, too blurry and far away to clearly make out any features, but it seemed to be staring directly into the camera, as if it knew it was being watched. Hart concluded by being thankful for Stacy's barking, keeping what seemed to have been a potential stalker or home invader at bay, advising the rest of the crew to trust a dog's senses over their own. An hour later, another abnormal chance was observed at X0620. At irregular intervals, abnormal pulses of gamma rays were detected coming from its accretion disk. Scope specialist Hart even noted in her personal log that it looked like X0620 was blinking at her. Over the following weeks, Hart displayed unusual behavior, refusing to examine X0620 for extended periods of time, very noticeably shaken and even paranoid. At several points, the other crew members overheard her talking to herself in her quarters saying, "It followed me. It must have followed me here." On the 31st of March, 2020, OS-13's radio astronomer, Forrester, was recorded talking about an experience that had given him an aversion to being underwater. In his childhood, his brothers would constantly cannonball into the deep end of the public swimming pool, while a younger Forrester would be over at the shallow end in tears until his parents removed him from the water, or worse, his brothers pushed him into the deep end as a prank. This was not the same as the fear many people have of what's lurking in the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean. This was a public pool, clear water mixed with blue chloride and sweat. What unnerved Forrester the most about being beneath the water wasn't what he could or could not see. It was what he heard when his head dipped below the surface. Every time he went underwater, for as long as he could remember, there was a sound beneath the muffled shrieks and splashing of kids in the pool above him. Under the water, Forrester could always hear someone crying. It was a low, dull weeping, the kind that told even a young child that the crying was the result of something terrible happening. the kind of something that nobody ever came back from. It had always emanated from the deep end of the pool, the parts that were darker and obscured by shadows, where air bubbles rushed upwards from storm drains. Forster had only been 6 years old when he first heard the crying, convinced that there must be someone trapped underneath the pool, pinned under the water. It was only when he was slightly older that Forster discovered someone had drowned in the very same public pool, a decade before he had first heard the sound of crying coming from beneath the surface of the deep end. After learning about this unfortunate accident, a young Forster refused to visit the local pool again, instead volunteering to do housework whenever his family decided they'd go swimming. As had followed each of the previous stories shared aboard Observatory Site 13, shortly after Forster had told the crew about the crying at the deep end of the pool, an abnormality was detected coming from X0620. Random bursts of gravitational waves started to appear, tiny blips that were picked up by photosensory equipment. One of these incoming bursts spiked while being recorded, causing radio astronomer Forster's eardrums to burst. He suffered a seizure and immediately needed to be restrained and taken to the medical bay by the rest of the crew. Forster was no longer present on any of the station's audio or video recording devices, implying due to his symptoms, he remained in the medical bay, or worse. At this time, any subsequent communication between Observatory Site 13 and the SCP Foundation back on Earth was sporadic and unreliable. After 3 days, the Foundation received a distress call. However, the audio recording was distorted considerably. After cleaning up the static on the audio file, Foundation personnel detected overlays of laughter mixed with screams. The closing recording from Observatory Site 13 was made by the expedition lead, Neil, on April the 19th of 2020. He recounted a story that was very familiar to the Foundation personnel back on Earth that heard it. It was a story about a group of researchers sent to observe a black hole from aboard a space station. They were told to sit and listen for a long year and a half, to keep watching and occasionally poking at the black hole until something poked back. They thought they could unlock the door to the cosmos, pierce the darkness with glass and steel. They thought that if they listened close enough, they would hear the voice of the gods. But gaze into the darkness long enough, and you will find your demons. Pay close enough attention, and you will hear our screams, crushed under the weight of gravity. The stories being told by the crew had given something access to the universe. Whatever it was used Neil's voice to speak, as if it recounted what happened to each of the crew. Chief Engineer Graham was sucked out of the airlock to remain in his ignorance forever. Scope Specialist Hart was blinded, only seeing the horrors of the endless night. Radio astronomer Forster, who refused to heed the voices, now bled profusely from his ears. He shall hear our whispers for eternity. But there had been 4 crew members aboard OS-13. What had happened to Neil? Did you hear the one about the researcher who went mad and murdered his colleagues aboard a space station? He threw them out of the airlock one by one, then logged a distress call so that others would come. By the time you hear this recording, it will be too late. Any further contact with the station ceased after this recording. The Foundation had dispatched a team consisting of members of Mobile Task Force Nu-9, the Null Chasers, to OS-13 in order to evacuate the personnel on board, retrieve any data logs aboard the station, and then activate its self-destruct protocols. After this remaining audio transmission from the observatory site, updated emergency orders were sent to MTF Nu-9 en route. Terminate any personnel on site, and under no circumstances communicate with any of the survivors. SCP-4827 is the designation given to the series of anomalous occurrences that took place aboard OS-13, which had been observing a black hole, X0620, 5,000 light-years from Earth. As a way to alleviate the stress of this assignment, research staff shared ghost stories that seemed to proceed with various mechanical faults, accidents, and out-of-character behavior from members of the crew. Each time, the resultant incident paralleled certain details of the ghost stories told around the black hole. Agent Teska's breath catches in his throat as the trunk pops open, his service weapon rattling in his clammy palm. He can't believe what he's seeing. It's awful. No, it's worse. It's impossible. In his free hand, he's still holding his cell phone up to his ear. The voice speaks again. "You know what must be done, Agent Teska," it says. Teska grips the revolver tighter. His heart races. This isn't what he wanted. But now, he doesn't have a choice.
All because of SCP-6205. Pay close attention. This is a story about an incredibly strange murder. A murder that took place at Site-19, the SCP Foundation's largest containment facility. As best we can tell, this all began when an intelligence operative named Andrei Teska experienced a bizarre happening while working for the FBI. More specifically, he was a key analyst in the organization's domestic terror task force. His particular focus was a violent white supremacist organization known as the Arcane Knights of the New Confederacy. FBI agent Teska had been listening to their phone tap records and monitoring online purchases for months now, and he was starting to get exhausted with the endless repetitive chatter. Guns, drugs, racial slurs, rinse and repeat. Until one day, he heard something extremely strange. The Arcane Knights of the New Confederacy seemed to be summoning a demon. At first, he thought it was almost laughable, but their online activity and phone logs painted a clear picture that they truly were attempting to summon an ancient supernatural creature from some kind of forbidden text. As their plans advanced, Agent Teska realized that he needed to tell his superiors at the FBI. Sure, he didn't believe that demons existed, but what if they did? Surely it was better to be safe than sorry, right? His superiors didn't agree. In fact, they thought it was so stupid that Teska even brought it up. Soon he became something of a laughingstock with his department. People even started calling him Demon Dre, much to his frustration. He knew that in one decision he'd set his career back years. He'd been passed over for every promotion and commendation, because who would ever want to promote Demon Dre? But while his decision to report the demonic entity got him ridiculed at the FBI, it made another far more clandestine three-letter agency extremely interested in him. We're speaking, of course, of the SCP Foundation, whose field agents were embedded in the Bureau. They used the intelligence that Agent Teska had gathered to perform their own raid against the Arcane Knights of the New Confederacy, and found that everything that he had proposed was all too horrifyingly true. The terroristic group had indeed gathered the thaumaturgic knowledge and artifacts to summon a powerful demon from the 8th Circle. They had even written plans to use the terrible creature to attack a Jewish cultural center during Passover. Mobile Task Force agents were able to engage the skinhead sorcerers in a tense firefight, which ended in several members of the gang being killed. The rest were taken into Foundation custody, where they would be debriefed, given amnestics, and returned to the normal prison system. If it wasn't for the work that Agent Teska did, many innocents would have lost their lives. Foundation agents approached Andrei Teska and brought him to a secure location, where they gave him knowledge that would change his life forever. The supernatural was real, and the SCP Foundation was the secret group that fought against them. Agent Teska now had two choices. He could deny what was being offered to him. He would be given drugs that would make him forget any of this, and he could go back to being Demon Dre around the offices of the FBI. Or he could quit the FBI, join the SCP Foundation, and use his nose for the supernatural to save more lives and be actually appreciated for it. To someone with Teska's Save the World ambition, it was really no question at all. At the SCP Foundation, he was undeniably doing good in the world, but somehow he still felt unfulfilled. He may have been holding the line against the literal forces of darkness in the world, but he was still doing it from a desk in a large, dark office in the middle of a nondescript building. He felt satisfaction in being a small but useful cog in a beneficial machine, but he still dreamed of being a real hero out on the front lines, and he could think of one way to change that. Aaron Graham cowers underneath a desk as chaos unfolds all around him. SCP-682 has breached containment and broken into the analytics department, chasing down and devouring anyone who wasn't able to find a hiding place. He could hear those monstrous reptilian footsteps around him, followed by an occasional human scream, then the sickening crunch. Another space in the department that would need to be filled after this. After the initial massacre, the monster starts flipping desks, looking for more morsels to devour. Aaron can feel fear coursing through him as the presence of 682 grows closer. It can't end like this. Nellie will never know what happened. And as he prays for his life, his prayers are answered. As a mobile task force kicks in the door and barges in, peppering 682 with high stopping power gunfire, and in the process, giving him just enough time to run out of the room and escape. The most messed up part of all of this? It's not even the first time this has happened. Aaron Graham was also an analyst for the SCP Foundation, but a data analyst. It's kind of like being a regular data analyst, except occasionally you had to hide from escaped monsters rampaging through the office. It was a deeply important job, but a job with a problem. It didn't pay very well. Sure, plenty of jobs don't pay well, but the poor salary of the SCP Foundation data analysis position had a real cost for Aaron Graham. His dear pet Labrador, Nellie, was suffering from cancer, and the only way to save her life would be a series of risky and expensive surgeries. Surgeries that Aaron Graham couldn't afford to pay for if he still wanted to keep a roof over his head and keep both of them fed. So in order to save Nellie's life, Aaron made a difficult decision. He was going to steal from his employers, one of the most powerful organizations in the world. Not a heist, of course. As a data analyst, he was too smart and too conservative to do that. Instead, he decided to be subtle about it, embezzling by degrees, stealing a little here, a little there. Over the course of several months, he'd be able to steal $13,000 and save Nellie's life, and nobody would be any the wiser. He didn't feel good about it, of course, but with his dog's life on the line, he'd do anything he needed to save her, even if it ruined his career. Not that they'd ever be able to catch him anyway. He was so brilliant at covering his tracks, fastidious in the way only a level 2 data analyst could be. And he was right. The Foundation never did spot Aaron, but sadly for him, something far more dangerous was watching him closely at every step. But back to Agent Teska. He wasn't willing to let his childhood dreams die out this time. He'd spoken to friends in the mess hall at lunch who were field agents. He had heard all about their high-octane gunfights, with thaumaturgists firing deadly mimetic blasts at them, or the times they got monsters into headlocks and held on for dear life while waiting for reinforcements. That was what he wanted. No more pen monkeying or desk jockeying, and he told them exactly that. They suggested that he train up for the yearly field exam, and if he passed it, he could join them in the exciting and incredibly high mortality rate world of being an SCP Foundation field agent. He signed up for the exam and read about the training rubric, the knowledge, the physical, the weapons test. He'd do whatever he needed to do in order to ace it all. He hit every book in the Foundation library, gathering as much data about defeating the anomalous firsthand as possible. He bought a gym membership and started working out several times a week. He started getting advice from his field agent coworkers, and of course, he hit the firing range every single day. He expended hundreds of rounds of 9mm handgun ammunition in bettering his aim and getting used to the recoil. But in doing all of this, he made a terrible mistake. On his monthly earning reports, he decided to declare the money he spent on all of those bullets as a business expense. After all, it was the furtherance of career progression, right? That meant it fell under the purview of an SCP Foundation expense. And that's precisely where he was wrong. Not long after filing this expense report, he received a mysterious call from an unknown number. The man on the other end had a calm, even-toned voice with a British accent. Strange. The voice, as polite as could be, said, "Agent Teska, it has come to our attention that you're claiming deductions for the costs associated with your personal firearm. And while that is perfectly fine, you have to be able to prove that the handgun is an ordinary and necessary expense for your line of work." Of course, Teska argued that it was necessary. He was going to be an agent soon. He needed that ammunition to train for the examination. But the mysterious voice was having none of that. He wasn't a field agent yet, and until he was, this was a fraudulent expense. Thankfully, the voice had a suggestion for Teska on how to make all this right. Promote yourself, sir. Do something that's unquestioningly fieldwork in order to justify the expense. Create an emergent need. The voice gave him several days to rectify the situation, and in 7 days to the minute, the mysterious figure called Teska back. The voice took on a more threatening tone this time, implying that some negative consequence would befall Teska if he didn't make this right. The intelligence analyst and aspiring field agent was aghast. "Are you threatening me?"
The voice remained calmed as it replied, "No, sir, this is just basic accounting. If we don't resolve this misappropriation, then it'll appear on next month's sheets as an outstanding item. You wouldn't want that, would you? To make extra work for your friends in payroll? I can justify the expense for you if you'll let me. I'll do 99% of the work for you. Does that sound good?" Teska knew that this voice was malevolent, and that whatever it wanted him to do, it wouldn't be good. But what options did he have anymore? He knew on some level that the voice wasn't the actual accounting department of the SCP Foundation. But even so, it seemingly had incriminating information on him. His career, the thing he'd built his entire life around, was hanging in the balance here. The voice had him by the throat, but something else was in a much worse position, or at least was about to be. Aaron Grant's scheme had seemingly gone off without a hitch. He'd skimmed $13,000 from the SCP Foundation, and he had paid for all of Nellie's expensive surgeries. And wonderfully, they'd been successful. Nellie was in remission. She was going to live. And as a result, Aaron Graham wouldn't need to steal anymore. But in the eyes of a certain mysterious figure, the damage had already been done. Restitution would have to be paid, but mere money wouldn't cut it anymore after the betrayal that Graham had committed against his employers. Two forces were about to collide. In the middle of the night, while Aaron was tucked in bed, Nellie asleep at his feet, he felt the door open, and some unknowable force entered the room. After pulling another in a long line of late nights, Agent Teska left work, only to reach his car and hear something bumping in the trunk. After popping the lid, he screamed in horror. A man he did not know, but we know as Aaron Graham, was bound and gagged in his trunk. At that moment, he received a call from his mysterious harasser. "Why is there someone in my trunk?" "Excellent timing, Mr. Teska. His name is unimportant to you, but this is one of your co-workers. He's been embezzling money for the better part of 6 months, but he's going to help make up for it by justifying the maintenance, training, and use of your sidearm. Take him out of the boot, throw him to the ground, and shoot him. The restraints I used will not leave any ligature marks, so you can remove them afterwards and dispose of them before you call this in. Perfectly explainable self-defense." As Teska looked down at the man bound and gagged in the trunk, tears streaming down his face, he thought about his job, his life. Was there any way he could throw it all away now for the life of a stranger? It seemed like such a good idea at the time. Teska steadied his breath and lowered the phone. The conversation was over. Whatever came next, it was already decided. He leaned into the trunk, looming over the terrified man curled inside. Aaron Graham's eyes widened in fear. A report would later read, "In the morning hours of 2015-08-20, a Level 2 data analyst was fatally wounded in the parking structure of Site 19. The analyst was shot in the torso 3 times with 9mm ammunition, consistent with that issued by the Foundation. A ballistic match as well as various forensic evidence collected at the scene was able to connect the homicide with Foundation intelligence analyst Andrei Teska, who was arrested by Site 19 security and questioned. All of this was the work of SCP-6205. What exactly is this anomaly, capable of running circles around members of the SCP Foundation and even inducing them to murder one another? The truth is, nobody really knows. It's a pataphysical, reality-warping entity that has, for reasons unknown, attached itself to the SCP Foundation accounting department. It manifests only as mysterious phone calls that can reach anybody, from the lowest staffer to the O5 Council, or letters on an ever-changing letterhead. And whenever it notices that people have been cooking the books, scraping a little off the top, or even declaring fallacious business expenses on their company cards, it will often respond with severe measures. Letting it have its way is the only way to contain it, which also comes with the benefit that the SCP Foundation has saved a lot of money on attempted accounting fraud. So as long as your transactions are all looking legitimate, you have nothing to fear. But if you do find yourself receiving a call about your financial record-keeping from a mysterious voice, don't try to lie to it. It already knows everything. Buildings crumbled as people ran, screaming for their lives. SCP-682 was loose, tearing up streets, smashing cars, attacking anyone unlucky enough to be close enough. The Foundation had exhausted all its options. They tried sending in SCP-2800, Cactus Man,
But this spiky superhero had fallen. The Spectre. SCP-4494 had tried in vain to halt the advance of the hard-to-destroy reptile, but the physical manifestation of crime fighting hadn't been strong enough to withstand the monster's attacks. There was only one remaining hope, the most powerful SCP. SCP-6101 and his trusty sidekick, SCP-6101-1, arrived on the scene, flying fast enough to break the sound barrier as they arrived. They'd both been prepared for this by Foundation researchers, who had presented the dynamic duo with tissue samples taken from SCP-682. SCP-6101 had effortlessly been able to erase it from existence, while his canine companion had eaten her sample. They were ready to take on the reptile. SCP-682, realizing another challenger dared to approach it, snarled and taunted. SCP-6101 looked like little more than an ordinary human child, with no abnormal features. Nothing anomalous about it. This would be easy. Undeterred though, SCP-6101 drew his signature guns, Fear and Loathing, and fired a barrage of pure light and pure darkness. The volley of shots struck SCP-682's claw, immediately erasing it from existence. Injured, terrified at having lost a limb, SCP-682 immediately changed its demeanor, now begging SCP-6101 to spare its life. But instead of listening to the monster's plea, SCP-6101 raised Loathing and fired a fatal shot. At long last, SCP-682 was neutralized, for good this time, earning SCP-6101 the Foundation's highest honor award from the O5 Council as thanks. There was never any doubt of SCP-6101's victory. He was, after all, the most powerful SCP. In 2019, the existence of various anomalous organizations, including the SCP Foundation, became known to the public. The advent of the Broken Masquerade also happened to coincide with another significant event in the history of the anomalous, the birth of the child who would one day become SCP-6101. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, and named Ethan Prosper, the young boy would be one of the first to grow up in a world where the Foundation no longer operated in the shadows. Something that would alter the very course of the child's life. With the details of their operations made entirely public, the Foundation was known to civilians across the world. Children were taught about what the SCP Foundation did in schools. Their containment efforts were broadcast on the news, and every move they made was discussed and even rightly criticized by politicians all across the world. The impact this knowledge of the Foundation had on little Ethan as he grew up was undeniable. He came to idolize the anomalous organization. To him, they perfectly fit with another love he developed over his childhood, a love of superheroes. Ethan Prosper adored superheroes. From the moment he was old enough to talk, it was practically the only thing he ever talked about. Teachers would award him gold stars for his drawings of himself alongside various famous comic book heroes. His earliest book reports, written in unkept handwriting, about the second-hand Marvel comics that his parents picked up at a yard sale. In the pages of those comics, Ethan didn't just learn the basics of reading, but also found something more: inspiration. When Ethan was asked to present to his class about what he wanted to be when he grew up, he went all out. Instead of a simple speech, he created a massive comic on A3-sized paper, illustrating himself as a superpowered hero, fighting alongside the SCP Foundation to battle dangerous anomalies and protect the world from the unknown. There was, however, maybe only one thing that Ethan loved more than superheroes: his pet dog, Heidi. The pair were inseparable, with the energetic pooch being fiercely protective of her human best friend. As such, it was hardly a surprise that Ethan included her in his presentation as his sidekick, Heidi the Hero Hound. But less than a decade after Ethan was born, tragedy struck. One day in 2028, the boy had been playing outside with Heidi in the backyard while his parents were in the house. Neither one saw any cause for concern. After all, they lived in a quiet neighborhood, and Ethan was never more than a few short feet from the house. Suddenly, both parents noticed a distinct difference in Heidi's barks. She often barked when playing, but this sound had changed. It was distressed, mixed with whines and whimpers that conveyed something was wrong. Rushing to the back garden, Ethan's parents practically felt their hearts stop the second they saw their son lying face down on the grass, still and barely breathing.
An ambulance quickly arrived at the Prosper home, rushing a still unconscious Ethan to the emergency room of nearby Les Bonheurs Children's Hospital. He was rushed in by paramedics, stable but clearly suffering from something. Ethan's distraught parents spent hours in the hospital, pacing anxiously through the sterile corridors, their minds racing with fear. Exhaustion eventually forced them into restless sleep, sprawled uncomfortably across cold benches, only to jolt awake at every passing footstep or voice. Desperate for answers, they pleaded with nurses, doctors, anyone who would listen, frantically asking for updates on Ethan's condition, their hearts heavy with worry for their son. It had already been dark for hours when the doctors were able to offer an explanation. Ethan's condition had been stabilized, but the boy was very, very ill. In fact, he was terminal. Aware that they weren't fully equipped to treat him, the staff at Les Bonheurs arranged for Ethan to be transferred to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. There he would remain hospitalized, though there was little that could be done to cure his condition. Ethan's parents tried to maintain some semblance of hope that the treatment options the doctors at St. Jude's were looking into would work. After all, they lived in a world where the anomalous was public knowledge, and some new cure could be right around the corner, but there was no guarantee. Both put on brave faces for their son, but as weeks slowly became months and Ethan showed no signs of improvement, it became increasingly obvious to his parents their only child would soon be gone. The only comfort, besides his parents' encouragement for him to get better, was having occasional visits from Heidi. One of the nurses assigned to check on Ethan helped the boy's parents sneak the dog into his room at the hospital, shutting the door and closing the blinds so that no other staff noticed an animal on the premises. The months started ticking down, closer and closer to the time the doctors predicted Ethan's illness would become too aggressive to survive. His parents tried to find as many ways as they could to make their son's remaining time as enjoyable as possible. They reached out to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the charitable organization that fulfills the wishes of terminally ill children. When a representative from Make-A-Wish met with Ethan and asked him what wish he had always wanted to come true, the superhero-idolizing boy who'd grown up in a world of the anomalous had only one answer. He wanted to become an anomaly. Not just becoming anomalous, but being officially declared as the most powerful SCP by the Foundation themselves. And he wanted to help them contain other anomalies too. Ethan Prosper wanted to be a superhero. The SCP Foundation's Department of Public Relations had only been around a few short years since the masquerade was broken. Whenever interacting directly with members of the public, the team were instructed to be as obliging as possible, unless doing so would jeopardize any ongoing containment efforts or Foundation investigations. So when they received a call from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, they had quite the dilemma on their hands. On one of those hands, they wanted to offer the help they could to grant Ethan's wish. On the other, there were still some Foundation operations that had to remain secret from the public. Granting a child, even a terminally ill child, access to the tiniest portion of the SCP Foundation might pose a potential security threat. So realizing this decision was far too important to be left in their hands, the Department of Public Relations raised it with the highest authority within the Foundation that they could, the O5 Council. The Council debated the request for several hours, before eventually coming to a unanimous decision. They would grant Ethan Prosper's wish, viewing it as an opportunity to strengthen public relations. Answering a request from Make-A-Wish would certainly paint the SCP Foundation in a positive light in the eyes of the public, potentially allowing them to continue their more nefarious anomalous activities with far less scrutiny. People were often more willing to turn a blind eye to the bad that the Foundation did if they were seen doing something so unilaterally good. Much to Ethan's surprise and joy, the next visitors to his hospital room at St. Jude's were a team of Foundation staff straight from Site-301. The boy could barely contain his excitement, speaking and moving faster and with more enthusiasm than he'd been for months during his long battle with his illness. The Foundation staff, headed by Site Director Rushpa Chakravarti, explained that they were designating Ethan SCP-6101, registering him as the most powerful anomaly that the Foundation had ever encountered. Alongside him was Heidi, now referred to as SCP-6101-1, the pair of them classified as Thaumiel. According to the details included in SCP-6101's entry within the Foundation database, he was too powerful to contain and was to be left in the care of his family until the Foundation ever needed to call on his assistance. Ethan was free to describe the full details of his powers to the Site-301 staff, and with his love for comics, he had no shortage of ideas. If anything, he was spoiled for choice. The extent of SCP-6101's powers would remain unknown. However, his entry in the archives mentioned him displaying flight, super strength, and invisibility along with every superpower associated with all of the superhero characters published by Marvel Comics. SCP-6101 was also considered to be anomalously brave and capable of accomplishing anything he set his mind to, a note added by a staff member who praised Ethan's courage in facing his terminal condition. According to drawings and descriptions given by Ethan, as SCP-6101, he carried 2 guns with him at all times, named Fear and Loathing, which were capable of firing bullets of pure light and darkness respectively. On contact with an anomalous monster, these bullets could erase their target from existence. SCP-6101-1 was also recorded as being fiercely loyal to SCP-6101, and was regarded as the second most powerful SCP, protecting her owner from any anomalous organizations seeking to use his powers for themselves. Over the course of role-playing together, the Foundation staff visiting Ethan staged multiple imaginary containment breaches of various dangerous anomalies for SCP-6101 to battle or help the Foundation recontain. There was even an imaginary battle against SCP-682, or rather, a staff member dressed as the reptile. On May 18, 2028, came the ultimate finale in the epic saga they had staged for SCP-6101. Director Chakravarti reported that a highly dangerous anomaly, SCP-Omega, had broken free from its containment and was causing havoc, so much so that all the Foundation's efforts to recapture it had failed. Chakravarti called upon SCP-6101's assistance, and Ethan was escorted from his room at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital to Site-301, protected by members of Mobile Task Force Psi-301, also known as Genie, in a battle. Secretly, SCP-Omega was nothing more than another staff member in disguise, playing along so Ethan could engage in an imaginary battle, but that didn't dampen the excitement for the 9-year-old hero. With telekinetic powers and verbal threats, he intimidated SCP-Omega, forcing the rogue anomaly back into its containment cell. As the doors sealed shut, the onlooking staff erupted into cheers and applause, celebrating Ethan's victory. Site-301 director Rushpa Chakravarti held a special ceremony shortly after, where an SCP-6101 was awarded with a rare honor, a Foundation Star, as a commendation for his bravery in defeating SCP-Omega. It had not only given Ethan a boost to his confidence, but was also one of the happiest days of his life. The SCP Foundation's Department of Public Relations would later publicize SCP-6101's file, and his bravery was even reported on by local news outlets. The story about him defeating so many dangerous anomalies became an inspiration to countless other terminally ill children like him. Ethan Prosper had become a superhero. Donations to the Make-A-Wish Foundation surged when details of Ethan's heroism became public, allowing them to assist with the recoveries of numerous other sick children. It remains unknown what happened to SCP-6101 after his historic victory. Non-disclosure agreements between the SCP Foundation and Make-A-Wish, as well as respect for the family's privacy, had meant that the exact details of what became of him have never been made public. Some have expressed optimistically that Ethan was able to make a full recovery and overcame his illness, though it's just as likely that he tragically perished sometime after his wish was granted. You see, it wasn't anomalous abilities that made SCP-6101 the most powerful SCP. It was the hope and comfort that it provided a young boy when faced with the end of his life far too soon.